This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit.
That's how the madness of the world tries to colonize you, from the outside in, forcing you to live in its reality. It's Annihilation, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. I don't know what happened. I do know what happened, and we'll get into what happened. But we have a lot of notes. I don't think this will be a 4-hour episode, but we got a lot of notes. So we're going to get right into it. We do not have a Guess Who this week because Mr. Vandermeer is not a huge fan of character descriptions. We have so much else to talk about. So let's get to it with our summary if you have not read or watched Annihilation in Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
So we're going to go a little more in depth this week than usual because I think if you haven't seen this, it's so weird, you're going to need some extra details. So yeah, we're going to go a little more in depth than usual. These summaries will be a little longer than usual. Also, they're entirely different, so that's another thing. Here is the book. I sourced a lot of this from Wikipedia and then added my own 2 cents. Because one thing I've noticed, Wikipedia's plot summaries are often not correct.
Are they not?
Not so much not correct as they will move things to places where they aren't. I noticed it specifically in this one, I believe in the movie plot synopsis. It tells you a piece of information in a different part of the summary than you find it out in the movie, basically. And I've noticed that on other movies we've done before. It's somebody writing it with the foreknowledge of what happens.
Right.
And so they put pieces of information that certain characters know in certain places in the summary, but not where that information is revealed to the audience. Anyways, I thought that was interesting.
Really,
and that's what I mean when I say wrong. I guess it's not necessarily wrong, but just like, I don't know. Anyways. All right, here is the book. A team of 4 women cross into an uninhabited area known as Area X, an unspecified zone in the U.S. that has been closed to the public for the past 30 years. The group consists of a biologist, our main character, an anthropologist, a psychologist, and a surveyor. The story is relayed to the reader through the journal of the biologist written after most of the events of the book take place. The group is told that they're the 12th expedition to enter Area X, and a ways into the book it's revealed to us that the biologist's husband was part of the 11th expedition. Her husband unexpectedly and mysteriously returned from that expedition, arriving in their kitchen with no recollection of how he got there. The rest of his expedition turns up similarly. A few months after his return, he dies of cancer along with the rest of the members of the 11th expedition. This is all relayed in chunks as we move through the current narrative of the 12th expedition's journey through Area X. Soon after arriving in Area X, the expedition discovers a round structure with a door leading to a set of steps that descend deep underground. The biologist refers to this structure as the Tower. This tower was not on any of their maps or intel coming into the zone, and despite misgivings by some of the group, they decide to explore it. Within this tower, they discover English writing on the wall that descends down a spiral staircase. This writing is cryptic and poetic, but seems to allude to ideas of destruction, regrowth, etc. The writing is also composed, seemingly, of plant material growing out from the wall. Upon examining the writing, the biologist inhales some spores from that script. After returning from the tower, the biologist discovers that the psychologist, the leader of the expedition, has programmed the group with hypnotic trigger words that allows her to control them without their knowledge. The biologist is seemingly immune now to that hypnotic suggestion due to a reaction with the spores, or at least that's her supposition. Side note, every night at dusk, the group hears a very strange moaning sound in the distance. The next morning, the anthropologist is missing, and the psychologist claims that she couldn't take anymore and decided to leave. She got spooked. The group then goes back to the tower where the surveyor and biologist once again descend. In the tower, they come across by themselves. The psychologist stays up top. In the tower, they come across the body of the anthropologist. The biologist believes she was killed by the creature responsible for the text that is written on the wall, which she dubs the crawler. She also concludes that the psychologist used hypnosis to force the anthropologist to try to get a sample of the crawler, and this resulted in the anthropologist's death. When they get back to the surface, the psychologist is gone. That night, the biologist sees a light coming from the lighthouse, which does make an appearance in the movie, and decides to go investigate, leaving the suspicious and unnerved surveyor behind. You'll notice I'm not saying any names. We'll get to that later. At the lighthouse, the biologist discovers a hidden room containing hundreds of old journals from past expeditions, indicating that the Southern Reach, which is the organization that is investigating Area X, has not been truthful about how long they've actually been investigating. She also discovers that her husband's journal, and a photograph of the original lighthouse keeper, or what she assumes is the original lighthouse keeper. She then discovers the psychologist dying on the beach after having jumped from the top of the lighthouse to escape some unknown entity. The psychologist's wounds begin to grow plant material, and she emits light after she dies. On the way back to camp, the biologist has an encounter with the moaning monster that we've been hearing every evening, and barely escapes before being ambushed and shot by the very paranoid surveyor, before being able to sneak up on said surveyor and shoot her in the head, killing her. The biologist is wounded, obviously having been shot, and realizes that the injuries that she has are slowing the process of her quote-unquote brightening, a transformation process that Area X has induced in her since she was infected with the spores. Now, as the sole survivor, she reads her husband's journal and does some analysis, revealing that the animals within Area X have human cells or made up of human cells, implying that they are mutated members of the previous expeditions. The biologist's husband is one of during that reading the journal, she kind of reads their whole exploits and realizes or sees that her husband was one of the two survivors of his group. He decided to repair a boat and goes exploring up the coast with it, potentially to find the border and come back to the real world, but also it's kind of vague what his goals are. The biologist then decides to return to the tower, not the lighthouse, the tower, where she has a wild encounter with the crawler before coming to a door. She does not go through that door. She turns around, leaves it, passes back by the crawler, who decides not to mess with her this time. We'll explain why later. As she turns back and looks at the crawler, she sees the face of the lighthouse keeper in it, and thinks that is potentially the first victim of the first person to become the thing that it's complicated. And then she travels up to the surface. There, she decides to remain in Area X and explore potentially to find any part of her late husband's presence. And that's where the book ends. All right, the movie.
Lena is a biology professor and former soldier. Her husband, Kane, who was also military, has been MIA for a year, and she basically presumes him to be dead. Until one night, when he suddenly shows up in their bedroom. He's acting strange and either can't or won't tell her anything about where he's been or how he got home. His nose starts bleeding, and then his health begins to quickly deteriorate. While rushing to the hospital, the ambulance is surrounded by military vehicles. They seize Kane and use a sedative on Lena. She wakes up in a cell-like room and speaks with a psychologist named Ventress, who tells her that Kane is in total organ failure. Lena demands to know more about the mission he was on, prompting Ventress to show her Area X, an unknown phenomenon in which a shimmering barrier has surrounded and is expanding around a piece of land. They can't get readings from any tech that they send in, and no human expedition has ever returned until Kane. Ventress was going to lead a small, all-female squad into Area X to try and reach the lighthouse where the activity originated. Lena volunteers to go. Joining Lena and Ventress are three others, Cass, Josie, and Anya. The first strange thing to happen inside Area X is the entire group waking up with no memory of making camp, but 3 to 4 days' worth of food rations are gone. Next, Josie gets attacked and almost killed by an enormous mutated crocodile. The group makes camp at the old Southern Reach headquarters, but quickly discovers a video left behind by the previous expedition. In the video, they watch as Kane cuts open another soldier's stomach to reveal that his intestines are moving around like a snake. They later find the corpse of that soldier torn apart and fused with the wall and the strange alien plants that are growing inside Area X. That night, a mutant bear attacks Cass and drags her into the woods. Lena finds her body in the morning. The group grows more tense and Anya wants to turn back. Lena argues that they're closer to the lighthouse than they are to where they started, so it makes more sense to continue and leave from that end of Area X. The group camps in an abandoned house that's surrounded by flowered shrubs growing in humanoid shapes. That night, Anya discovers that Kane is Lena's husband, something she'd kept from the group. Anya completely loses it and ties everyone to chairs, accusing them of murdering Cass and inventing the bear story. At that moment, they hear what seems to be Cass screaming outside. Anya runs out, but the sound is coming from the mutant bear. It kills Anya and turns to attack Lena, but Josie is able to shoot it. In the morning, Ventress says that she's continuing to the lighthouse and the others can do what they like. Josie says she doesn't want to fight anymore and seemingly becomes one with the shimmer. Lena continues to the lighthouse, where she finds a burnt-up corpse sitting in front of a camera. She plays the tape and sees that it's Kane. He tells the camera person to find Lena and then uses a grenade to kill himself. The camera person walks into the frame and it's revealed to be a Kane doppelganger. Lena hears noise coming from a creepy-looking tunnel next to Kane's corpse. She goes down into what looks like a giant alien stomach and finds Ventress, who tells her that the shimmer will encompass everything. Ventress then disintegrates into a pulsing light thing. Some of this is very hard to describe. Which absorbs a drop of Lena's blood and creates a humanoid figure. That figure mimics everything Lena does, and she's unable to escape from it. She eventually tricks it into accepting a grenade from her, at which point it fully transforms into her doppelganger. Lena sets off the grenade and runs. The doppelganger catches on fire and then sets the lighthouse on fire, maybe on purpose? The entire shimmer burns and crumbles around Lena, eventually vanishing. Back at the military base, once Lena is finished being deposed, she asks Kane if he's really Kane, to which he replies, "I don't think so." He asks if she's really Lena, and she doesn't reply. They embrace, and their eyes shimmer.
The end.
End of film.
Yes. So before we get into the questions and my segments, as is probably clear now from the Let Me Sum Up, these two stories are about as different as possible while still being considered an adaptation. So, like, apart from the general premise and kind of the characters, like the main character specifically, and her husband, almost nothing remains the same about the narrative and even the thematic elements. We mentioned in the prequel episode that there was a note about how Alex Garland did not like reread or take any notes from the book when he was adapting it. And I now absolutely believe that, like 100%, because it's really more feels like a dream inspired by the book than like a direct adaptation. So I'm going to do my best to talk about what the two share in common, but this is one of the harder, better in the book, better in the movie discussions I've had to lead, because like while they're both wildly different, I thoroughly enjoyed both of them in different ways. And so I just wanted to lay that out ahead of time to kind of set expectations and where the discussion is going, because it's going to be tough. Anyways, we'll get into it. We got a lot to talk about. In our first segment, was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
What?
Honestly, don't you two read?
Oh, okay, so one thing that this movie employs is a non-linear narrative structure. So the film starts after Lena has already come back out of Area X. And we also see flashbacks to her being questioned throughout the film, as well as flashbacks to like her and Kane together, and also her having an affair with like a coworker. So I was wondering if I guess if any of that was from the book, like if the book employs a similar structure, or if it starts like after the main events of the story and then kind of jumps back to where we start.
Okay, so two different questions. The question you wrote down, the answer is no. So the question you wrote down is, does the book start after the main events of the story and then jump back?
Yes, I'm sorry.
The answer to that is no. The answer to does it involve like some non-linear kind of flashbacky stuff? The answer is yes, and we'll get to that later. I have it in later segments. But we never actually get an after the events of this book. From what I've read, our main character does return from Area X in subsequent books. But the last line of this book is her saying, "I am not returning home," as she ventures forth to explore Area X more on her own. Again, I have read that in the sequel, the next book, she does eventually return, and I think we mentioned in the prequel that some people have talked about how some of the elements of this movie were similar, or at least somewhat similar to some of the stuff that happens in later books. And I think that's probably what they're talking about, where she comes back and they question, would be my guess. It sounds like she does come back in one of the sequels, but again, in this book, that is not the case.
Okay. One of the first things that we see in the movie before we start on Lena's story is an asteroid hurtling through space and crash landing into Earth right by the lighthouse. And that is where the shimmer that causes Area X come from. Is that also the case in the book?
No, we do not know where Area X, the origins of Area X in the book. There's lots of speculations, one of which being aliens or some sort of environmental disaster phenomenon or something, but it's never confirmed one way or the other. I had this in better in the book because I really do prefer the complete mystery of it. We finished the book never knowing what it was she encountered. Was it an alien? Was it all in her mind? Was it something from another dimension? We don't know, and that's kind of the point. You can just guess it's probably alien, but you don't know. And I thought the meteor at the beginning kind of just weakens that and doesn't add much. Like all it does is just from the beginning go, this is aliens. Yeah. And to me, that weakens the mystery and makes it sort of, because otherwise, like, again, in the book, it's, you don't know, and that not knowing is a big part of the experience. So.
Does Lena find out about Area X? Because it's like this big reveal in the movie. Does she find out about it after her husband mysteriously returns and then almost dies, and then they both get snatched by the military?
No. So in the book, the general public is actually somewhat aware of Area X, and she knows that's where he's going. She knows, she's actually kind of mad at him in the book about it because she knows it's dangerous and like has heard, like people don't come back a lot or blah, blah, blah. And she also volunteers for the next mission after her husband dies, and her motivations for this are kind of left up to interpretation. There's like hints of it that she was trying to go see what he saw, but also, and see what happened to him, but also it's kind of a selfish motivation. It's left ambiguous. We'll kind of talk about that later, and exactly what her motivations are. But she does volunteer, fully knowing like what it is. She's never kidnapped by anybody or anything like that. It's a pretty big change in the movie. I don't have super strong feelings about it. I will say the movie's version feels realistic in the sense of like it's this kind of big cover up that nobody knows about.
I feel like that's what would happen in real life. Right.
In the book, it's more of like a thing, and it's kind of alluded to the idea that like people are aware of it, but it's been around for like 30 years and nothing has ever really come of it, and people have kind of stopped caring, and it's sort of passed into like a boring like I don't even know how to describe it. There's a couple lines early in the book talking about the way it's perceived by like the general public. Yeah. But they are aware of it and know that something weird is there, but that it's never, they don't know what, and the government has not shared any information. It does, the movie's version, I like keeping it secret in the sense that like it eliminates questions of like, well, do people try to get in there on their own? Like, you know what I mean? If nobody knows about it and that sort of stuff, then you can just kind of, it's like a big secret that works. I don't have strong feelings either way, because I also thought the book's version was kind of interesting, where people kind of just stopped caring about it, and like it just sort of passes into this.
Oh yeah, that's that weird.
That's place. That weird thing down there that they still don't know what it. I don't know. I thought it was interesting, both ways. Yeah. Either way is fine with me.
Can I ask a follow-up question that I don't have written down?
You can do, yeah. I will do my best. There's a lot. This is a very dense. It's a short book, but it's very dense. It's less than 200 pages, but there's a lot going on, and it does a lot of like sort of world building. Also, the prose is really dense, which I'll share some later, but I'll do my best.
I'm just curious because you said that in the book the general public knows about it, but in the movie, one of the big things with Area X is that it's expanding.
Yes.
And like getting bigger. So I'm curious if that's also the case in the book.
It is, but nobody knows that part.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, the people studying it know that part. Yeah. But it's revealed to us and our Lena did, or the biologist did not know that. It's revealed by the psychologist like late, like as she's dying in the book, like the scene where she dies. She tells her that it's expanding and they don't know why or what to do about it, basically, and that's why they're sending these missions in, among other things. But it is expanding, but that's not common knowledge.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So it's expanding slower then, I guess, because it felt like it was expanding pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't know
in the
how
movie.
quick it's supposed to be in the movie, but in the book they even give some numbers, I think, at some point, and it is very slow. But it's accelerating, but it's accelerating slowly. So they
Yeah.
think eventually it could expand like several miles a year. Right now it's expanding like meters a year or something like that.
Okay.
So it's expanded, a mile or two over the past 30 years, but they think it could exponentially speed up or something like that. So is my memory.
One of the flashback scenes where we see Lena and Kane together, she's trying to convince him to tell her where he's going on this expedition because she doesn't know
Yeah.
in the movie. And he tells her that he's going to the same hemisphere as her and says, so if you step outside and look up, we're looking at the same stars.
Right.
And I really loved this exchange for reasons that you'll get into, but I wanted to know if any of that was from the book.
Not from the book. We see very little. So again, the book is all it's a journal. We are reading the
okay.
journal entry we are reading the biologist's journal. Like that's
Okay.
what this book is.
So this is an
essentially.
epistolary novel.
Yes, basically. I think you could say that. Yes, because when she gets to the end, she's like, "This is my journal. Here, you've read it. Whatever." So yeah, essentially, it doesn't it's not really formatted necessarily like an epistolary novel, but it is essentially. And so we don't get a lot of actual dialogue. It's more so her recollections of events and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not so much like, then this character said this. There is a little bit of that during the like current mission that they're on. Even then, I might be yes, there is. So like during the when they're in Area X, the actual expedition, there is some dialogue and stuff, but in general, there's very little apart from that. It's mostly her like recalling times with her husband and stuff like that. So no, this line is. But anyways, also there's very few, if any, lines from the movie come from the book, and this is not one of them. I do love this line. I love that she kind of takes the piss out of that because it's so cheesy. Like she starts making fun of him. I thought this whole scene was really cute.
Yeah.
Of them in bed together, and his response, he's like, "I get really turned on when you patronize me. It's really hot." I thought that was funny. Also, a really beautifully shot scene. I love the way that their faces are kind of obscured by each other, which goes on to what we find out later about the fact that they're hiding,
Yeah.
or kind of both hiding stuff. Something him like where he's going, and her the affair, and them being obscured by each other kind of represents that. And I think that Oscar Isaac and Natalie Portman had really good chemistry together, but not from the book. But I love that line and that whole scene.
Yeah, so they mentioned in the movie that this new expedition team is going to be all female, and I think they say that the previous ones had been like all male in the movie.
In the book, the last one was I don't know if it's ever specified what the rest of the expeditions were, but the last one before them was all men.
Okay, so that's but
The one her husband was on was all
but it
men.
is the case that this expedition she's
Yes.
on is all female.
Yes. Yeah, the 11th expedition was all men. This one's all women. It never goes into explicit details on why. It just says for the 12th expedition, which is our current one that our characters are on, that it was, quote, chosen as part of a complex set of variables that govern sending the expeditions. That's all the explanation we get for
Right.
why it's all women. A lot of what the Southern Reach does is shrouded in mystery, and we'll find out later even more than we originally thought, because they are kind of like this, secret government organization. The book kind of leaves everything up to your interpretation, to the point that I'm not sure whether the author even knew why they were doing some things, which I both liked and disliked. We'll talk about this aspect more as we go, but it's intentionally vague and intentionally left up for interpretation, like everything in the book. But that's part of the point, because it is just weird, and it's supposed to like be weird, but it also sometimes feels like you just didn't care.
Yeah.
And didn't think about it too much, and like I don't know. I'd be interested to see other people's thoughts. But that was probably my biggest complaint about the book, which I'll get to obviously more later. It's just it did feel a little aimless at times in its organization, but that also may just be or sort of in its writing, but that also I think is part of the point. So it's hard. I don't know. It's hard to like knock it necessarily, because I think it's intentional, but it's also like, well, yeah, but it's still a little frustrating. I don't know. Anyways.
When they're inside Area X, one of the first things that happens is that they all like wake up and they're like, I don't remember making camp. We're missing days and days worth of food rations. But
Yeah.
they can't remember it. And that plotline doesn't really go anywhere in the movie.
Yeah.
But is that an element in the book? Does it mess with their memories?
So no, and I thought the movie was going to do something interesting here and utilize an element from the book, and then it goes on not to at all, which I thought was interesting. So I mentioned in this let me sum up that there's a hypnosis angle where the psychologist hypnotizes them. Initially, they are hypnotized, and they are knowingly hypnotized while they cross the border. In order to, and it's explained in the book is like in order to prevent them from like panicking and to keep them calm as they pass this border, which is like very mysterious and whatever, shrouded in mystery. So they hypnotize them to go over the border, and then they unhypnotize them once they get in the actual Area X. And so I thought, we don't see her hypnotize them before they go in the movie. They're just kind of walk through. But then when they like wake up and they're like, oh, it's been days. I thought the angle was going to be that they had been hypnotized that whole time. The movie does not do that. I thought they were going, or at least if they did, maybe it was another scene that got dropped where that gets addressed at some point. I liked the mystery of like 3 to 4 days of rations being missing and them not knowing what happened. And again, I thought it could work if they had gone the hypnosis angle. It never reveals it. I don't know. We'll talk more about the hypnosis later. I think it still works just because, and it's one of the things the movie and the book can kind of get away with because it is intentionally weird and disorienting. If things don't make sense, even if you never explain them, it still kind of works. Yeah. You know what I mean? Which, again, was kind of some of my complaint with the book a little bit. But it was also something I liked about it. So it's good. It's hard to parse. But yeah. I do. That would be my explanation would be that the movie was going to do the hypnosis thing and a scene got cut or something. Or somebody didn't like it. Or something, yeah. Or they thought, well, this is too complicated. Why do we need to explain that? But they needed to show them waking up in Area X still, and that's how they shot that scene. So they left that all in and mentioned them. And when they're like, well, we'll just mention the food missing. Like, we'll leave in the part about the food being missing because it just adds mystery. Who cares if it's never addressed or explained what happened there? Yeah.
Yeah, I do wish that the movie would have been a little more consistent with that or like paid it off somehow, but
Yeah.
Are there weird flowers inside Area X?
So there is strange plant life inside Area X, but it's pretty specifically referenced in regards to the writing on the wall that I mentioned, which is in the quote unquote the tower. I'm going to call it the tower. That's what our main character calls it. The other people call it a tunnel or it goes underground. We'll get to it later, but our main character only refers to it as a tower, and she doesn't know why in her head she sees it as a tower, but she does, even though it's underground. And so the movie cuts the tower entirely, kind of. We'll talk about it later. And definitely cuts the whole part with the plant writing. So anyways, but it's very weird, like fungi, like weird plant that this writing on the wall is made out of. And that's the main reference to like weird plants, but it's kind of assumed in the vibe you get from the rest of the area that there is like strange plant and animal life in here. And I liked in the movie the plants all growing like different plants or flowers growing out of like the same one or whatever. I thought that was a cool way to illustrate it and was pretty. And I liked that we get that throughout. We get these bursts of color where like there's like a light at one point. There's like a big like old like street light or something. That is like covered in these flowers just in the middle of like a green field or whatever. I really liked that visually, so I was a fan of that addition. Nothing like that is specifically mentioned in the book.
Does the book have a giant mutant crocodile that's full of teeth on the inside?
No, that crocodile scene is wholly an invention for the film, but I do think it draws some inspiration from the book. They have an encounter very early when they get into Area X in the book where a wild boar starts charging at them down the path that they're on, and they like pull their guns up to potentially shoot at it, but at the last second, it just kind of veers off.
It saw the guns.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's we never see that boar again or anything. But it's just kind of our first introduction to the animals being kind of weird or something going on there.
Yeah.
Because like the biologist notes that it seems like it's like possessed or something, like it's just like behaving weird. And so I think they're kind of drawing on that scene of like this animal behaving strangely. I liked the scene in the movie with the alligator. I thought, or the crocodile or whatever it is. I mean, it's a hybrid of like a shark and a crocoshark or whatever. I liked that scene. Like I said, I like that it shows Lena's military background in the movie. She does not have one in the book, and gives us kind of a weird, fun action beat, like, you know, surprise moment. I was not expecting her to get pulled into that. I was very unexpected. And I will say the book is not really about action beats at all until like the end. There's some kind of actiony moments. But in general, like when she kills the surveyor and like is getting chased by the moaning creature, kind of actiony scenes. But in general, apart from that, there's not really action scenes. And I think the movie decided to amp that up a little bit just to give a little more excitement throughout.
Yeah, for sure. I did note immediately after they had to fight this giant, mutated, very aggressive crocoshark. Like the very next scene, they're out in a boat on the water, and I was like, "Oh no!
Yeah.
You would not get me out on that water after that.
No,
there's more of them suckers in there. Absolutely not.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. No, thank you.
Do they find like gear and things from previous expeditions?
So the base camp they set up in Area X is in the same area as previous ones, and there's a mention of them like fixing old like stuff that was there.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually at the lighthouse, when she visits it, she does find remnants of previous expeditions that we'll talk about later, of like stuff going on there. But they never go to I think the main thing you're kind of mentioning is they never go to an old like Southern Reach base.
Yeah.
Like at one point in the movie, they end up in an old like the old headquarters of the Southern Reach.
And they say like, oh, it's expanded past it.
Yes.
So it's in Area X now.
I like that a lot in the film. It kind of, again, plays off the idea that Area X is expanding and overtaking everything. It also gives us this cool, creepy building to explore, which you don't really have much of in the movie in the book, other than the lighthouse later. And that they do go through that same kind of town that they do later in the movie. But I liked having the old Southern Reach base having been taken over and overgrown. I thought that was a cool addition that is not in the book.
Do they find a memory card that has a video of a guy's organs moving around like a snake?
No, they do not. So the book specifically mentions that none of the expeditions have been allowed to bring in like technology or recording devices of any type since I think the first expedition. And the reason relayed in the book that is the reason that the biologist has been told by the Southern Reach has something to do with it biasing observations, and that they want the unadulterated like written observations of each of the people separately. They don't want them to like record something and then all gather around and watch it and have that influence what they think they're seeing, basically.
Okay.
Is kind of the idea that, again, that is the idea that, or something like that, is the idea that the biologist relays to us as what the reason they can't have technology. Now, that is not necessarily the case because the Southern Reach lies about everything we find out towards the end of the book. And all of their sort of explanations for stuff have not been accurate. But yeah, so they do not have video cameras or anything like that. I loved that scene in the movie, the scene of him cutting up in the other dude's stomach. I love the way it's shot. Super gnarly. I love the weird, crazed smile on his face as like the dude's organs are moving. I thought it was great. It's a bit Hollywood compared to like the slow creeping dread we get in the novel. The book is much more about like slowly building this weird like ambiance that is creepy and like unsettling, whereas the movie leans a little more into sort of traditional like horror film moments. But I didn't mind it. I thought they were creepy enough that it worked, and still like inventive enough that it worked. But it's a little more traditional. The book, again, is much more about like existential dread and not like, oh my god, that guy's guts are moving, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyways,
I mean, and to be fair, it makes sense for them to change it to a visual medium for the movie anyway. If she was just sitting around reading journals,
it's a little bit harder to get across the existential dread that this book does when you read it through a film medium, I would say. I'm not saying it's impossible, but like the moments in the book that like make your hair on the back of your neck stand up, I don't think would be very easy to express via film. And I'll talk about a couple of those moments later in the Better in the Book segment. And I'll read a couple of them, but I don't know how well it would translate. So I think the movie made kind of a smart choice by making these additions.
So then shortly after that, they find that guy's corpse, and he has become one with the wall in a very grotesque manner.
Yes.
Is there anything similar to that in the book?
So that scene in particular is not from the book, but there is something kind of similar. And that was one of my favorite moments from like the first half of the film, which is a little more traditional, like kind of Hollywood horror movie type parts. But that part in particular, I thought was awesome, like super cool and gnarly. I love how he's just like smeared across the wall, and it's and it does kind of capture a bit of the feeling of the descriptions you get of some of the bodies that they find in the book. Like, and specifically when they find the anthropologist's body down in the tower, it has a description that feels similar-ish to what we see in the film there. If honestly, maybe less like horrifying and grotesque than what the movie shows us, but it's similar. So this is when they find the body. Gently, I knelt beside the anthropologist. There wasn't much left of her face, and odd burn marks were all over the remaining skin. Spilling out from her broken jaw, which looked as though someone had wrenched it open in a single act of brutality, was a torrent of green ash that sat on her chest in a mound. Her hands, palms up in her lap, had no skin left on them, only a kind of gauzy filament and more burn marks. Her legs seemed fused together and half melted, one boot missing and one flung against the wall. Strewn around the anthropologist were some of the same sample tubes I had brought with me. Her black box crushed lay several feet from her body. So, like, again, because the one thing in particular I remember seeing in that moment in the movie is like that character's jaw is like
in two different places.
And you know, this one says like green ash like coming, but it feels. And then later when we get the death of the psychologist in the book, there's a description of like plant-like material kind of coming out of her wounds. And so to me, that beautifully captured and honestly almost elevated the descriptions of the bodies that we get in the book, which again, those aren't the creepiest moments in the book. The creepiest moments are other things in the book. But I thought the movie did a really good job taking some inspiration from that and turning it into this like incredibly beautiful, horrifying. Because beautifully horrifying is like the whole point of this book. And so I thought the movie clearly captured that in this scene.
Does the book have a giant mutated fuck off bear? And if yes, does it grab one of them?
It does not. But I also think this was inspired by something from the book, which is the moaning reed creature that we actually never see in the book. We just hear it. And this first scene with it, I thought was kind of lazy and lame. Like when it shows up through the fence and grabs Shepherd and drags her off, I was like, okay. Like it's just kind of like, I just thought it was a little cliche and boring. But the scene with it later is amazing. And I love that scene, which you kind of had to have this scene to get to that, I guess, at least to some extent. But I do think it is inspired by, there's this creature that we never see in the book that moans every evening at dusk, kind of like a weird, eerie human-like moan. In the distance, and then later when she's coming back from the lighthouse, she's walking through the reeds area where she thinks it lives, and she ends up getting chased by it. Like she hears it in the reeds. We never see it. She never sees it. She's able to outrun it and get past it, and basically evades it. But we hear it, and I think that's kind of with the moaning that the bear does later and stuff. I think that's kind of where they pulled the inspiration for that from.
Are there fairy deer with flower antlers? Some fey shit.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and that is not specifically mentioned. But I do think the film, like those deer or whatever, very little. All of the animals that are mentioned in the book, from my memory, are basically described as just looking like normal animals, apart from very specific things, which we'll talk about. But they're not like, oh, they have like flowers growing all over them or anything like that. But I do think the film does a good job of capturing sort of the haunting beauty of Area X that you get from the book. and it like really captures the overall vibe of Area X. I also really love the use of the oily rainbow shimmer effect on everything. Like it's in the sunlight in the background as it comes through the trees. I also love the flowers that you mentioned earlier everywhere. It just feels appropriately pretty and weird and creepy, which is what it feels like it should look like when you read the book, even though none of those things are specifically mentioned in the book.
Okay. Another thing I was curious if it was from the book was the plant people. They're like shrubs that are growing in a humanoid shape. More Fae shit. This movie could have been about like the Fae realm merging with the human realm, and I would have totally bought it. Are there plant people in the book?
So yes, and this is like one of the only things that the movie directly includes from the book, and I'm really glad they did because I was excited to see it. They're not quite as explicitly described in the book as they appear in the film as looking like people, but close. She sees these like plant moss lichen-y things in the vague shape of people in the abandoned town that she goes to. When she goes there, she's the only one there at that point.
Yeah.
Because the surveyor stays behind in the book, and the psychologist has already disappeared, and she doesn't know where she is. She ultimately finds her at the lighthouse, kind of like she does in the movie. But she goes through that town by herself. And I thought the movie really nailed how creepy this was. I'll try to find the description in the book really quick. But in what had been kitchens or living rooms or bedrooms, I also saw a few peculiar eruptions of moss or lichen, rising 4 or 5 feet tall, misshapen. The vegetative matter forming an approximation of limbs and heads and torsos, as if there had been runoff from the material too heavy for gravity that had congregated at the foot of these objects, or perhaps I imagined this effect. One particular tableau struck me in an almost emotional way. 4 such eruptions, 1 standing and 3 decomposed to the point of sitting in what once must have been a living room with a coffee table and a couch, all facing some point at the far end of the room where lay only the crumbling soft brick remains of a fireplace and chimney. So yeah, like the idea is that she sees these things that are vaguely reminiscent of people that are like plant shaped. I thought the movie kind of elevates this, honestly, beyond even what is described in the book. And makes it even creepier, which it's already creepy in the book. Yeah. Because I think at one point she actually thinks she sees them moving at some point. But
I mean, they turned the corner into that little town, and as soon as I saw those human-shaped plants, I was like, absolutely not.
Yep.
No.
Yeah.
So at one point we see her look at her blood through a little like travel microscope.
Yeah.
And she can see that her blood is shimmery, like everything else there. Is that from the book?
So she does a fair amount of microscoping in the book and looking at samples. I don't recall her ever looking at her blood, but she does look at lots of samples and realizes that things are, all capital letters, weird. And she does realize that she is in fact, quote unquote, infected, for lack of a better term. Not from my memory from looking at slides of like her blood or anything, but more from how she feels and what she's experiencing and stuff that we'll talk about later, and how her skin is glowing, which the movie does not do. But I did like in the film that they used the shimmery effect of the shimmer to signify, the stuff that is, again, quote unquote, infected, for lack of a better term.
I think they should have done a skin shimmer. They could have used the same effect from Twilight.
Yeah. She doesn't shimmer in the book, but she does glow, and it grows as quote unquote the brightness is what it's described as in her inner brightness, which is it's all very like nebulous-y, like it's hard to explain. But yeah, I liked it.
So one of the things that we find out by a flashback in the movie is that at least part of the reason, if not the reason, that her relationship with her husband was going through some tough times was that she was having an affair with one of her coworkers. And we see the scene where she ends this affair, and this man says to her, I called him Garden Party Man for the whole movie.
He's another professor at Johns Hopkins.
At the very beginning of the movie, we see him invite her to a garden party.
Yes.
And he says to her, after she's like, this is over, he's like, it's not me you hate, it's you. And she says, no, Dan, it's you too.
So the whole affair plot line, not from the book, but I absolutely loved that line.
That's an amazing clap back.
Incredible line. Amazing. But there's quite a bit to get into here. I figured this was as good a place as any to get into this part. So again, the affair is not from the book. In the book, their relationship sort of falls apart before he leaves for much more mundane reasons, in that he's very outgoing and social and she's not. And originally they think that these differences in their personality, we kind of we get this interspersed throughout the whole book. Like we get like little intercut sections where it's like her recalling times from her life and their life together and stuff, and kind of thinking about it. And originally they think these differences in their personality and stuff and how different they are makes them a better couple. But over time, this sort of causes a weird unspoken tension and falling out between them. And I thought this was a really interesting exploration of like relationship dynamics in the book, because again, it's never anything like exciting or interesting. It's just that they're different, and the way they interact with each other just doesn't, again, it just slowly over time deteriorates, and it just doesn't work, to the point where when he leaves, they are not in a good place, but it's never like a spoken thing. She's sort of consumed by her work. She's obsessed with biology. She has been since she was a child. It's been this like motivating force in her life, and just doesn't seem to care about him in the same way that he cares about her. The movie changes this to just being an affair, and I think this makes sense. I think this would be a thing that people would not like in the movie, and I get it. It's a little bit cliche. It's a little bit easy. The book uses a ton of real estate exploring the inner workings of her mind and the ways in which she has self-sabotaged and stuff, and the ways in which their relationship, the nuances of their relationship, it spends a lot of time talking about that in a way that I don't think the film could. And I think condensing this down to like she had an affair and this caused this issue, like this rift between them, I think it works. I think it makes sense. It's maybe the best way to do. I don't want to say it's the best way. I think you could do what the book does. I just think it would be very, very hard.
Yeah, the movie would have to spend a lot more time on it than it did with the affair.
Yeah, and also the movie subtly changes thematically, like what the whole journey that the main character goes on, the biologist, Lena in the film. Which we'll talk more about later. So I get why the film made the changes it does. I really like, and I think it's really interesting what happens in the book, the sort of nature of their relationship in the book. Movie's a bit cliched, bit expected, less nuanced, but it works for the medium. It works for the film.
Yeah.
So.
I will say though, I was confused for part of the movie because I thought she was sleeping with the coworker
after
he vanished.
Yeah. I think the movie very clearly intentionally leaves that vague for a while.
Yeah.
Because, and that's one of the things, and I don't think I had a specific note about this, that's one of the things that the book does keep, is the revelations of the main characters, like faults and things that have happened. Like in the book, we don't find out that her husband was part of the previous expedition until 50 pages in. Like, and then she like reveals it in the journal as like, I've been withholding information from you. My husband was on the blah, blah, blah. And then same thing with like their relationship not being great or whatever is kind of slowly revealed over the course of the book. And I think the movie does a similar thing there by slow playing the information it doles out to us. In terms of like what is going on, like, oh, the guy from the beginning, oh, they're sleeping, oh, that would make sense. She disappeared and she was seeking comfort in him. Oh, it was before he left. Like I think that's kind of a similar idea to what we get in the book, in how the sins of our protagonist are revealed, shall we say. And I thought that was interesting.
So they're making camp at this house, back to the flower people, and Anya, Gina Rodriguez's character, goes crazy. She's been not handling it well up to this point, but here she really tips off the deep end. She ties everybody up when she finds out about Kane and that Lena had withheld this information. And she like accuses them all of having murdered Cass and like made up the story about the bear.
Right.
Is any of that from the book?
No, so none of that scene's from the book. I honestly can't recall if the others on the expedition in the book know that her husband was on the last expedition. I believe the psychologist does because she's like higher up and is like in charge and knows stuff. But I don't know if any of the rest of them do. I can't remember. I don't think they do. But they never see any evidence of him or anything. Like they don't come across the video. They don't have any evidence. They don't know anything about the last expedition other than what everybody knows, which is they all just kind of showed up and then died of cancer. Blah blah blah. So it never really comes up. That scene I really enjoyed in the movie. We'll talk more about it here in just a second. The rest of the scene, it's probably the closest in this scene is probably closest to the scene in the book where the surveyor, who's kind of closest to Gina Rodriguez's character. The surveyor in the book is the only one that has like an assault rifle. She's like the military-ish one. And Gina Rodriguez in the movie gets like a machine gun one, but like she's kind of whatever. And it in the book, there's a scene where when Lena comes back from the lighthouse, the surveyor shoots her because she's like freaking out and paranoid, and it's like you did something where it's a psychology, like she just doesn't trust her and just shoots her immediately on sight. And so it's kind of similar to that idea. I think again that's kind of where they pulled the inspiration from that at least that aspect of the scene. But all of the details of it are nothing like the book.
Yeah. So we see the return of the giant fuck off bear.
Yeah.
In this scene, horrifying. Maybe the most horrifying thing about it is that Cass's voice, like screaming and pleading, comes out of the bear.
Yes.
Is there anything similar to that in the book?
So no, I loved this entire scene in the film. I say no. The closest thing, as I mentioned earlier, is the moaning creature we never see. It's never explicitly stated that it's like a human voice, but it's kind of implied that there's like something eerily human about the moaning coming from this unseen creature in the distance or whatever that they hear every night. And I think, again, that's what they were pulling that sort of weird moaning from. But everything else about the scene is nothing like anything from the book. I love the whole thing with Anya tying them up. It gave me really strong The Thing vibes. Like if you've ever seen John Carpenter's The Thing from the 80s, there's a whole scene where, because it's all about like paranoia and there's a monster and it like can hide, it disguises itself in people and they don't know who's infected with this creature and stuff like that. And it was very like, there's a scene where they're all tied up and, you know, they're trying to figure out who's infected and who's not. Like, so it reminded me a lot of that, which is an incredible film. And that, you know, those scenes in that film are amazing. And I thought this whole scene was just wild and terrifying. The other thing about the bear that I think potentially comes from the book, at least to some extent, or is inspired by the book, is that the moaning creature that we never see, the only thing she does see of it is at the point where she's being chased by it later, she comes across its trail and it's like sloughing off like an exoskeleton that it just like everywhere it goes, it leaves a trail of like flesh and skin and stuff that is like human. And I think that the design of the bear with like the
because you can see the skull.
Yes, I think that's kind of again the idea coming from the book of like it like shedding its outer skin at I don't know.
It's mortal flesh.
Yeah. Again, ultimately we find out in the book that that creature, she sees at one point part of the sloughed off trail exoskeleton is like a weird face, and she recognizes it. And then later realizes where she recognizes it from. It was from watching videos of interviews with the 11th expedition, which was her husband's. When they came back, when they just showed up, they like did interviews with them all. And the psychologist from his expedition, it was his face. So she kind of realizes, and I think I have a note about this later, but she's like, he never left. It was a mimic, a doppelganger that came back. And he is this creature.
Yikes.
So
Lena finally does get to the lighthouse in the movie. She's on the beach, and one of the really cool like visual things that the movie did is all on the beach are these like giant trees made of crystals. Is that from the book?
No, not mentioned at all in the book. Loved this in the movie. Super cool. Adds a ton of weirdness. Feels super alien. Well done, movie. Again, nothing like that mentioned, but I thought it was awesome.
Another thing that we see on the beach are like bones, pieces of human skeletons that have been arranged by someone or something.
Yep.
Is that in the book?
Nope. Also loved this though. At least no mention specifically. I did love in the movie how there seemed to be like sort of ritualistically arranged. They're like in a pattern. They're not just like scattered on the beach.
Yeah, somebody put them
yes,
there.
It's very creepy, very cool. I also think it works with the book lore because as we find out, tons of people have died here / killed each other. They've gone crazy and done, we don't know what all of the expeditions have done in the past, but we know lots of crazy nonsense has happened. And so it totally fits in with the sort of lore of this area that somebody, arranged these bones for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to explain it. You don't need to address it. Just see it there. Creepy, cool, awesome.
Does Lena follow a voice into a creepy hole and find Ventress inside something that looks like an alien stomach?
So, no. But I think this is the movie's version of the tower that I mentioned earlier, which is one of the main locations in the book that never really makes an appearance other than maybe this location in the bottom of the lighthouse.
She does go underground.
She does go underground for it, although in the book it's way like they go down a spiral staircase for hours.
Interesting.
And we'll talk more about that whole tower later in the book. It's a thing they explore several times. It contains the crawler, which is another thing we'll talk about more later. There's never really any description of this area being like sort of looking like literally it came from the movie Alien, which this does. It has very H.R. Giger vibes, who is the designer who did like the alien designs from the original Alien film. That does work because we ultimately find out that the tower is an organic organism. Initially they look at it and think it's like concrete and like something that somebody built, but ultimately once the biologist becomes infected, she is able to see it for what it really is and sees that it is organic and that it like breathes. And so that definitely gives more of the alien stomach vibes for sure. So I think that's where they're pulling that from. Again, more on that later. But Ventress is not inside there.
Oh, she's not inside.
She's at the lighthouse.
Okay,
which this is at the lighthouse,
right.
So it's similar. But she dies on the beach at the lighthouse. There is no the tower is not near the lighthouse. They're two separate locations in the book. So interesting.
I think it makes sense to kind of combine those.
Yeah, I didn't hate it. I kind of hated it. Well, we'll get to it.
But when she dies, does Ventress shoot crazy lights out of her mouth and then like
shrivel up
and compact herself and vanish?
No, she does not. When the psychologist dies in the book, which is the only one who has the same role, the psychologist is the only like carryover role from the book, other than our main character who's also a biologist. But they change what the other people are from the book to the movie. In the book, it is a psychologist, the biologist, an anthropologist, and a surveyor. And in the movie, it's like a biologist, a psychologist, a physicist. I don't remember what the other ones were. But anyways, and in the book, there was originally going to be 5 people. Yeah. But one of them, the 5th one was going to be a linguist, but they, for whatever reason, like they got eliminated from the team before they went into the area. So the movie just goes with 5. But so when she dies, she does not. She we'll talk about it momentarily, but she jumps off the lighthouse and dies on the beach by the lighthouse in the book. But when she does die, she does emit light. Like as eventually the biologist is walking away after she dies, and she looks back and sees light coming like from her body. But it's a much more peaceful, sort of less climactic, less dramatic death in the book. It is not the climax. Like we have a lot, like she then leaves there, goes back to the tower, and we get sort of the scene that we get when she goes into the hole under the lighthouse. Okay. So they kind of combined this so she didn't have to travel as much. Not the worst idea in the world, but yeah, those things happen in different places. So it's not particularly similar.
But when she dies in the movie, she kind of transforms into this like blob of light and matter. I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be, if anything. But that thing sucks up a little bit of Lena's blood, a little drop of blood, and then uses that to grow like an alien figure / clone
Yeah.
of Lena.
Yeah.
Is any of that from the book?
No. So that creature, the weird amorphous thing, kind of. We'll get to that. But the clone of her, no. That does not happen. I absolutely loved this scene in the movie. I could not get over how creepy it was. I like literally had chills the entire time from the moment it creates the copy of her until she blows it up and runs away. That whole scene was just insane. I loved it. So the book does insinuate that whatever is happening at Area X can create mimics or copies of people, and that's what her husband who comes back is or was. He dies in the book. But we never have it happen to our main character, to the biologist. I think this works really well thematically in the film, again, with the changes that the movie makes overall to the story. I like that she tries to shoot it. It's herself. Ultimately, this is all sort of about guilt and regret and that sort of thing, and we'll talk more about that later. But I love how she shoots it, and then it gets these weird tendrils that like pop out of it from the bullets, and it looks really creepy. It's so gnarly. And then how it like mirrors her movements. It's like slightly taller than her and alien-y, and it's everything about it. I love how it like slams her against the door and is like kind of like suffocating herself. So again, her own guilt kind of suffocating herself. Again, the movie creates a more concrete thematic arc of her confronting herself and the guilt that she has over cheating on her husband, and that leading to him coming to Area X and dying, basically. That's not really the same sort of thematic arc that we get in the book. It's a lot more vague and nebulous and up for interpretation. So I loved this in the film. Again, the whole dance thing she does with it. It's almost like watching. I felt like I was watching like a weird music video.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Fighting herself and how beating. It's just great. I loved everything about it, and we're going to talk even more about it here in your next question. But yeah, but no, obviously this does not happen in the book.
Right. Well, does she try to blow up anything with a hand grenade and then burn down the lighthouse or maybe the tower, which then destroys everything and the entire shimmer just vanishes? Did she kill it all?
So no, as I mentioned, and let me sum up. In the book, she just stays in Area X and keeps exploring. She does not leave. She does not destroy it. It's just there, and she stays there. I do think this works really well in the movie. I love that ultimately she avoids confronting her guilt by just blowing it all up, burning it all down. She avoids, she then returns and Kane is like, healed, yay, but it's not him. It's a mimic of him that doesn't remember what she did. So she doesn't actually have to confront what she did. I love that she never apologizes. They never talk about it.
Yeah.
Which I think is brilliant. They never discuss. She knows that he knows because she says that to somebody. Well, like I think to the Dan or whatever his name is. He's like, does he know? And she goes, yeah. So she knows that he knows, but she never says anything about it. They never discuss it. She never apologizes. And I love that this ending, she gets this new chance to correct old mistakes or make new ones, but she never actually fixes anything. And I love the final shot of the movie where they both look, they have this look. I'm mixed on the shimmer in her eye. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Him, I think, works because he is a mimic or whatever. Her, whatever. She still, in fact, she still has the organism in her or whatever. Okay. But more specifically, I love the look in their eyes, the unease, the anger, the sort of guilt in both of their eyes. Like she may have destroyed the shimmer, but she doesn't actually become a better person in this moment. It's like a super bleak ending. At least to me, I read it as a super bleak ending and I kind of loved it. I love how she doesn't apologize. And when she realizes that he doesn't remember, she's like, I don't have to confront this.
Yeah.
At least that's to me how that scene came across. Is like she's like she says something to him. She's like, are you whatever? And are you? And he goes, he says something like,
she asks if he's Kane.
Yeah. But there's a line where he says like, I think I remember you or something like that to her. he says something like, one of his last lines is like, I think I remember you, or I think something like that. And that moment, at least the way I interpreted it, is that she realizes he doesn't remember what happened.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't remember any of the past. He doesn't remember the mistakes she's made. She can continue not actually confronting it, addressing it. She never apologizes. I think, again, it's super bleak ending. I kind of love it. The book's ending is much more sort of open-ended and vague. Again, she just sort of decides to wander Area X, maybe finding her husband out there, maybe not. I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to get from the book's ending, but I was pretty sure with the film what I was supposed to get out of it. And so I liked that about the film. It was kind of the ending, and we'll talk about it more later, is a better in the movie ending for me because of a lot of things that changed. But I love that ending, and how, again, just it's still open to interpretation, but it's also like a lot more concrete than the book ever is, which I enjoyed. Okay, that was all the questions Katie had for Was That in the Book? She has a few more in Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
I did struggle with where to put questions for this one.
I always do. It's kind of, you can go either way with it.
Yeah. But I was curious if the shimmer was described at all in the book, and if so, if the movie got anywhere close.
So no, it is not. And our only description in the book is, quote, the actual nature of the border had been withheld from us for security reasons. We knew only that it was invisible to the naked eye, end quote. So in fact, in the book, it's described as not being visible. Now, again, they say it was invisible to the naked eye. We knew only it was invisible to the naked eye. They're lied to about everything. So it might not be.
Fair enough.
Not necessarily. But they never actually see the border there. Or she looks back, and now I was trying to find this moment in the book. They're not supposed to look at the border. They're hypnotized as they go over, and they specifically tell them to not look back at it when they walk after they're across it. But she does, and I couldn't find the moment where she looks back to see if it said what it looked like, and I couldn't find that.
Oh.
I was having trouble, and I was running out of time, so I couldn't find it.
Is there a reason that they don't wear some kind of hazmat suit when they go into Area X? Like, and I get that in the movie, this is probably just so that we can see their faces and stuff. But it seems like realistically they would be heavily geared up, like especially after Oscar Isaac came out hemorrhaging his organs.
Yeah, so they do not in the book. They do have respirators and stuff that they eventually use after our biologist gets dosed with spores.
Oh, so when it's too late?
Yeah, and even then she hides the fact that she got dosed. She just kind of like subtly mentions, oh, maybe we should wear masks when we're in here, but she doesn't tell anybody. But yeah, they never do. Again, they do have some masks and stuff that they wear, but in general, they just kind of wander around without any protective gear or anything like that.
This was wild to me in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, and I get needing to see their faces from the perspective of it being a visual medium, but also they were just like out here touching weird, unfamiliar plants without gloves. Like, stop touching plants with your bare hands. You don't know what kind of contact dermatitis you're going to get from that.
Yeah. No, I agree. And again, in the book, her husband comes out with, and everybody from Expedition 11 comes out with super cancer and dies in like less than 6 months. So like it is kind of ridiculous. But also the point is there's a couple things, but one of the things is that the weird aura of Area X sort of like messes with people's like cognitive ability to make like those kind of decisions. Like it's hard to describe without just reading it. Like it just, there's like a vague way that the just being in Area X sort of influences people and causes them not to necessarily behave in the most rational way all the time.
All right.
But yeah.
Okay, I guess.
Yeah.
Does Ventress, the psychologist, give off a weird vibe in the book? Because I felt like the movie was telling me not to trust her. Also, she has a supervillain name.
She does have a supervillain name. It's actually a villain from Star Wars. There's a Asajj Ventress is like a villain in like the extended Star Wars canon. But yeah, yes, and it's even creepier in the book. Like we find out she has ulterior motives that are never explained in this book. She was like definitely operating under orders from higher ups that nobody else knew about. More on this shortly, specifically in relation to the hypnotism thing. We'll talk about it here in just a little bit.
When they go into the house in the movie, was that house supposed to look like her house? Because like the staircases were identical.
So the house is never mentioned in the book. I don't know if they ever go in a house in the book, but in the movie, definitely that was not accidental. There's this great match cut. We get this great cut where it's when she's realized she's infected. She's looking through the microscope at the table, and then she sees like her blood or whatever with the shimmer on it, and then we get a shot through a doorway of her sitting at that table, and then it match cuts to that same shot of Oscar Isaac sitting at their table when he got back at the beginning. So it's definitely supposed to mimic.
See, because I thought...
And it might even literally be the exact set, which would make it even weirder and like intentionally creepier.
I thought the movie was going to do something with that. The movie didn't do. Because when Oscar Isaac's character first shows up there, she asks him like, how did you get back? Or when did you get back? Or something like that. And he says like, I saw you in the bedroom and I recognized you.
Yeah.
And I thought that the movie was going to do some kind of weird thing with like the two, like
the Upside Down?
Yeah, like, yes, like the Upside Down. Where like the two, I want to say realms, but that's not quite the word I'm looking for. Yeah, like the two dimensions like overlap and he was able to somehow like cross out of the weird area X dimension and back into the real dimension.
Yeah. No, that is not anything from the book, and I don't think that's the implication. I do think that that house in Area X intentionally is basically just identical to their house. Just again for the sort of uneasiness of it and like the creepy factor. And so they can do that cool match cut. But no, there's no sort of like parallel, upside down dimensionality kind of thing going on. Again, at least not in this book that it's ever addressed.
So Josie, close to the end of the film, decides that she doesn't want to like fight the Shimmer. She just wants to like chill out, I guess.
Yeah. She decides.
And then she like goes around the corner and then vanishes. Does she become one of the flower people?
In the movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Her character's not in the book. Again, none of those characters are really from the book necessarily. Okay. I mean, there are other people, but they're very different in the book. So that never happens in the book, but I really liked it in the film. I thought this whole scene was great. She has this line right before this happens where she says in the film, imagine dying frightened and in pain and that being the only part of you that survives. I wouldn't like that at all. Mm-hmm. And in reference to Shepard getting eaten by the bear and then the bear is making the sound of her like moaning or whatever, which one of the things in the book, and I don't remember if I have a note about this later, is that the Area X, the organism that or whatever, the creature, the thing that is like inhabiting this and like spreading through this area is like absorbing information and regurgitating it. Mm-hmm. Which we'll get to with the writing and stuff, but it's basically, at least that's the kind of the speculation. Again, we're all only getting one character's sort of speculation about what they think is happening. We don't know for sure what's actually happening. But the speculation is that it's like absorbing information and regurgitating it. And I think the movie here is alluding to that idea in that sort of the bear, when it kills her, is kind of absorbing her energy, for lack of a better term, and then sort of putting that back out into the world, and so or into this area, and so I like that that this character Josie doesn't fight it; she just kind of gives herself over to it. Again, not something anyone in the book does, but I thought it was both really creepy and really beautiful. It ties into this more concrete line of like, or concrete thematic exploration of trauma that the film gives us, because we find out that everybody on this expedition in the film has different types of trauma in their past and the different ways that they all, and then go on to find out the different ways they all kind of handle it / don't handle it.
Yeah.
And I thought this scene was really beautiful in the way that she doesn't fight it and joins it again, but also creepy and sad and weird. It's just it perfectly. It's nothing from the book, but it perfectly captures the weird, haunting beauty of the book. So I loved it.
Okay, so my last question here, and this is not from the book, but maybe you can still help me make sense of this, because this was the thing that did not make sense to me the most about the movie. So we see the entire shimmer get destroyed.
Yes.
After it catches on fire. Just like everything gets destroyed.
Yeah.
But then when she gets back, Kane, who we know to be a shimmer created doppelganger,
Yes.
is still there and he's fine.
Yeah.
And I had my question in here about like how could he be not Kane and how could she be not Lena?
Right.
Because I felt like the movie left it maybe like a tiny bit ambiguous. Not necessarily that she was a doppelganger, but like how infected she was or whatever.
Oh, okay.
And I don't, if the whole thing got destroyed, shouldn't he have also been destroyed?
So yeah. So I agree with your question. First off, none of this is in the book at all.
Yeah.
Even remotely. So I can't provide any insight from the book. What I can provide is what I got from the movie. And you kind of already addressed this, but I don't think that she's a doppelganger.
Right.
Because again, there was never a moment where they're like wrestling and we're unsure which one is which, you know what I mean? Which is like a typical that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We never get that. Like it's very explicit. The doppelganger, we know which one it is, and we see her give it the grenade, and that's the one that
Right. Well,
gets destroyed.
my thought was more along the lines of like, we know that she's infected.
Right.
And then at the end, when he asks if she's really Lena, she doesn't answer him.
Yes.
So my thought was more along the lines of like, maybe she's been like taken over by this infection.
Yeah. So I think going back to the more like sort of pulling back and like the like practical like plot holiness of it, I agree that it doesn't make a lot of sense that when she destroys it all, that he like is fine and survives and because he is a doppelganger.
Yes.
And is fully like an organism from
Yes. And like
Area
theoretically,
X.
based on what we've seen, all of the Area X organisms are like connected.
Yes, seemingly it's all like it's like a hive mindy kind of ish thing. I agree. And so I agree that doesn't make sense. Pulling back, what I think is going on here, going back to my sort of the thematic reading of it, I think the idea when they both still have the shimmer, one, he is a doppelganger. Doesn't make sense that he's still around, but whatever. Let's just let that happen. I thought the shimmer in her eyes doesn't make a lot of sense. Again, maybe she's still infected. I get that. But I think thematically what we're supposed to be getting from the scene is that she is still infected and that what she is infected by is still the trauma, the guilt. That when she destroyed everything, she still kept, because she destroyed it and didn't actually confront it, didn't actually deal with it. She still has that kernel of like, you know, rot or whatever in her.
Okay.
And that is going to consume them and ultimately lead to a negative outcome for them. I think is kind of the idea we're supposed to get there. I think is that she still is consumed by this guilt, even though she feels like maybe she destroyed it all. She got rid of it. Since she hasn't actually addressed it, they haven't actually fixed anything. She's just trying to basically move past it without actually confronting it. That's why we see the shimmer. That's what the shimmer in her is that, again, metaphorically, that like guilt, that whatever trauma.
Okay.
Blah blah blah.
I'll accept that.
I mean, do you get what I'm saying? Like,
No, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Again, I don't think it makes sense like narratively necessarily.
Yeah.
I think it more is a thing that makes sense thematically. So, all right. It's time now to find out what I thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
All right. So, some things that were better in the book. And again, just to reiterate, this is not necessarily things that are, it is things that I enjoyed in the book that weren't in the movie. But they're just so different. It's kind of hard to say better in the book, more so just in the book, not in the movie, and in the movie, not in the book.
So more aptly titled section, things Brian enjoyed about the book.
Yes, that is what that is what this is more aptly titled. So we have chapter titles in the book, and I love a good chapter title.
Oh, who doesn't?
There's only 5 chapters in this book, or sections, or whatever you want to call it. And they are initiation, integration, immolation, immersion, and disillusion. Love a good cryptic chapter title. It's a lot of fun. I thought it would have been cool if the movie did section titles similar to that.
Title cards. That would have been cool.
I mean, we get title cards of like Area X.
Yeah.
The Shimmer, whatever. But I thought especially because they could have even moved him around, and like immolation could have been like at the end. I felt like they could have used some of the similar, they could have used most of them and just kind of maybe moved them around or whatever. But anyways. So the hypnosis. There's a whole section here. I just want to talk about the hypnosis angle of the book that is not at all in the movie, or at least maybe was cut from the movie, at least to some extent, potentially based on our earlier discussion. But this goes into your question about the psychologist and her motivations, and is she giving off the same weird, creepy vibes? And so, yes, in the book, she puts them all under hypnosis to cross the border, as I mentioned, so they remain calm. But later it's revealed that wasn't even close to the extent of the hypnosis that she did on them. And I love how this is slowly revealed throughout the course of the book. Initially, they're aware of the hypnosis to go through the border, but that's all they think that was done. They're like, okay, we've been hypnotized, so we can go through this border, keeps us calm, whatever. But then very shortly after initially the biologist is dosed by the spores, they get back topside, and the psychologist says consolidation of authority, and this drops all of them into a trance, except for the biologist, who very quickly realizes what's going on and pretends it worked on her, even though it hasn't. And then the psychologist goes on to like issue them like commands about what they're going to do the next day and stuff. And one of the things she says is, you will continue thinking that the tower is made of coquina and stone. And again, this is sort of the thing that we find out later, that it's like this living organism, but the other people cannot see that because they are both hypnotized basically to not notice that it is this weird living organism. They just see that it's like a physical, like man-made structure kind of thing. And then also, so initially, and as I mentioned, the biology, it's so hard because the characters don't have names, which I'll get to here momentarily. They're just referred to by their titles. The biologist, Lena, our main character, thinks that the spores made her immune to this hypnosis, and that's why she's not affected anymore. There's another point later in the book where when they go in the second time into the tower, the psychologist is like, I'm going to stay up here and guard the entrance. And they're like, no, come with us. And then she ends up using hypnosis to get the surveyor to agree. And again, the biologist realizes what's going on, but she doesn't want to tip off that she's aware. So she's just like, oh, okay. Because then the surveyor's like, all right, I guess we'll go down by ourselves, blah, blah, blah. There's just a handful of the scenes like that. And then later, when they do find the anthropologist's body down in this tower, again, the biologist kind of comes to the conclusion that the psychologist came down there the night before with the anthropologist to get samples of this creature that is doing this writing, which we'll talk about here momentarily, and then hypnotized her in order to get her to go get a sample of this creature, and then the creature killed her, basically. Yeah. And she's like, there's no way she would have gotten that close to whatever this thing is by like on her own accord, because she was like freaked out and stuff. And so she goes like, she must have used hypnotism. And I love, again, the thing I love about this is how slowly it's revealed. And just, this is one of those creeping, weird horror things where it's like, you don't realize until the biologist realizes, and then watching the other characters be hypnotized without their consent, without their knowledge, is it's creepy, and I think that would have been really effective in the movie. Like this is one of the things that I think would have translated to the film just fine. Again, probably several reasons they didn't include it. Another point that I thought was really interesting, later in the book, the biologist herself tries to use some of the hypnosis triggers on the surveyor to get her to do something, but it doesn't end up working, and she's like, well, I guess only the psychologist can do it for whatever reason. And then there's one more time where hypnosis is used, but we'll talk about that later because it's in relation to a different point that I want to talk about. There's this thing in the book that is mentioned that never shows up in the film, and this is a device. It's the only sort of technological monitoring device that they have. I mentioned earlier that they don't bring in like audio recorders or video or anything like that, but they do have this device that's like a black box that has a little indicator on it that is black, and if it glows red, they have 3 minutes to get to a safe place. They don't know what it measures. They've not been told what it measures or anything, but that if it glows red, they have to get to a safe place. It's a fun, creepy, weird plot device. And later, we get this fun revelation that it literally doesn't measure anything. They were giving it to them specifically so that it wouldn't, knowing that it will never light up. It doesn't do anything, but that this would psychologically help keep the team calm by it not lighting. Telling them, if this lights up, you're in danger and you need to move, you need to leave, but it will never light up because it doesn't do anything. And so this keeps them calm because they're like, oh, we looked at it. It's not, our meters are never lighting up. So we must be safe. We must be good. And again, I thought that was a creepy, cool little thing. So getting into some of the pros, and I have this throughout, is one of the most striking things about reading this book, especially coming right off the heels of 50 Shades of Grey, is that the prose in this book is the polar opposite of 50 Shades of Grey in literally every way. And I'm going to share some select little passages and lines throughout. I'm honestly not even sure I understood them all, but because it is like dense, really well-written prose, and I'm just not that smart. But they linger with you. They kind of mull around in your brain in a way that is really evocative. And one of the lines, and it's similar to the line I mentioned that I used for the intro quote, is when you see beauty in desolation, it changes something inside of you. Desolation tries to colonize you. Again, we'll get that. That's like a very short one. I have some more extended segments here later. So the tower specifically, this is the thing I was very disappointed didn't make it into the movie, except for the very limited capacity that it did kind of at the end. They find a tower that is a cylinder that they think is concrete that descends into the ground and has a door at the top and a spiral staircase that goes down. Again, they go down it for hours and never really reach the bottom. She does eventually, or seemingly the bottom. But as I mentioned earlier, our biologist can't help but sort of perceive this thing as a tower, and she doesn't even really sure why her brain thinks of it that way. But again, that's one of those details that is weirdly creepy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really mean anything. I don't know.
It's interesting because what I keep getting, you keep saying the tower. I wonder if Jeff Vandermeer knows anything about tarot.
Oh, maybe.
Because the tower is a card in the like traditional tarot deck.
Right.
And it's like the worst card you can get. It's ruination. It's annihilation.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me. But it'd be so like everybody else always refers to it as like the tunnel or something else. And she keeps referring to it as the tower, and they're like, what is wrong? Like, why? And again, it's never really explored more than that. We never really get, but it's just this weird thing that makes it, reading this book, it just adds to the weird ambiance sort of the book. But in this tower, as I mentioned, when they get in there and they're descending the staircase, they find this writing on the wall that is made out of like plants, but it's English writing. And it goes down, it's a spiral staircase, and it spirals down the wall. And as far as they go down, it keeps going. And I'll share a little bit of it. Let me see if I can just find the whole thing real quick. Because it's relayed to us in parts in the book, but somebody on the internet put it all together. So this is at least most of the inscription from the wall, if not all of it, or from the wall in this tower. It is vaguely nonsense, but also not. It's very poetic, and here. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner, I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms that gather in the darkness and surround the world with the power of their lives, while from the dim-lit halls of other places forms that never were and never could be writhe for the impatience of the few who never saw what could have been. In the black water with the sun shining at midnight, those fruits shall come ripe, and in the darkness of that which is golden shall split open to reveal the revelation of the fatal softness in the earth. The shadows of the abyss are like the petals of a monstrous flower that shall blossom within the skull and expand the mind beyond what any man can bear. But whether it decays under the earth or above, or green fields, or out to sea, or in the very air, all shall come to revelation and to revel in the knowledge of the strangeling fruit. And the hand of the sinner shall rejoice, for there is no sin in shadow or in light that the seeds of the dead cannot forgive. And there shall be in the planting in the shadows a grace and a mercy from which shall blossom dark flowers, and their teeth shall devour and sustain and herald the passing of an age. That which dies shall still know life and death, for all that decays is not forgotten, and reanimated it shall walk the world in the bliss of not knowing. And then there shall be a fire that knows the naming of you, and in the presence of the strangeling fruit, its dark flame shall acquire every part of you that remains. Like, that's gnarly.
That's giving revelations.
Yeah.
It's giving like the descent down into Hades. It's
which we're literally going down.
I mean, you already saw it. Yeah, that you're already getting like descent into the underworld from that.
Yes.
But yeah, for sure.
But it's also talking about sort of rebirth and the seeds, and which is kind of the whole thing we get in this book, where the people are infected by these seeds, these spores, and then they are sort of reborn as.
I mean, that's just giving like Persephone.
Yeah, and again, it's when you get like chunks of this as they're walking down this dark stairwell reading this shit, it's so creepy. Like, it's so creepy. It's amazing. But yeah, that's that whole inscription. And there's this moment in the book too that is incredibly creepy, where she so somebody asks her what the surveyor asks what the writing is made of, and she says, "What are they made of? I hadn't even thought of this, though I should have. I was still trying to parse the lingual meaning, had not transitioned to the idea of taking a physical sample. But what relief at the question, because it helped me fight the compulsion to keep reading, to descend into the greater darkness and keep descending until I had read all there was to read. Already those initial phrases were infiltrating my mind in unexpected ways, finding fertile ground." Reading that passage creeped me the fuck out the first time, because the idea of being compelled to keep reading this thing that is descending down a spiral staircase to you don't know where, to dark depths below, and you have this weird compulsion in your mind to just keep following it and keep reading it, and it's also this super weird, creepy, like biblical. It was just, again, that's the kind of stuff in the book that is the creepiest and weirdest that I don't know how well would translate to film necessarily. I'm not saying it wouldn't, but something about reading it just really works. Again, so this stuff is made out of some sort of fungus or something. She leans in, she gets blasted by the spores and conceals it. There's also this great psychological nightmare of her like getting hit by the spores and then trying to like figure out if anything's happening to her, if she's getting sick, if she's, gonna die from it. She just kind of waits it out, and that's its own. Anybody who's ever like been worried they were getting sick or something, or knows what how kind of torturous that can be. Then so they leave, and then on the second visit, this is when she realizes that the walls are breathing and that this is all some organic thing and like it's its own organism, and that the surveyor can't see this because she's still hypnotized by the psychologist. Also, as they start going further and further down, they start realizing this writing on the wall is getting fresher, and they're speculating that they are getting closer to the thing writing it, which is also very creepy. And then they also start finding all this slime residue on the stairs. And this signs that whatever this thing that is writing it is like some large amorphous thing that is like smearing this writing on the wall as it goes down these steps. Again, it's all just deeply creepy, like Lovecraftian type stuff. Eventually, when they get down to the bottom of the tower the second time, at one point they see a third set of boot prints going up the stairs. and they don't know. They're like, what? We weren't aware of anybody else having been down here or anything like that. Eventually they realized, again, as I mentioned earlier, that this was a psychologist who came down there with the anthropologist and then came up by herself. And then ultimately, she thinks that the crawler, which is this thing that what she dubs the thing writing, the writing on the inside the tower, and the tower itself are some sort of like symbiotic organisms, that this thing is basically either has always been there or is like some sort of like, organism that like came into the tower, and now they have this weird symbiotic relationship where the crawler goes out and gathers information, and that's what this text is. It's basically regurgitating information, and it's like writing it onto the wall in some sort of weird like reproductive, again, it's all very weird alien-y, like alien biology. Like, it doesn't make sense because of course it wouldn't make sense because it's alien potentially or whatever. Anyways, all of that stuff, super creepy, super weird. None of it makes it into the book particularly, or makes it into the movie particularly, which was disappointing because all of that stuff was like the creepiest stuff to me. Another thing of prose that from the book that I thought was really interesting or fun. She's discussing how this is pretty early on, why she doesn't give the names of anybody. She says, "I would tell you the names of the other three if it mattered, but only the surveyor would last more than the next day or two. Names belonged to where we had come from, not to who we were while embedded in Area X." Again, but also there's more to that, the whole name thing, but we'll get to it. Going on, something else in the book that we don't get like any of in the movie is the backstory for the biologist and like her childhood and stuff. In the book, we find out why she became a biologist, because in her childhood, she had like a rough childhood. Her mother was an alcoholic. Her dad was like a con man. And she would go into her backyard, and they had this pool that they did not keep up. And it eventually like became its own ecosystem. It was, it got fish and minnows and all kinds of stuff in it, and turned into basically like a pond. And she would go back there to escape and just watch everything. And there's this great line of her discussing, she would go back there and pretend to be a biologist and research all this stuff. And she says, "Pretending often leads to becoming a reasonable facsimile of what you mimic, even if only from a distance." And she mimicked becoming or being a biologist until eventually she was, basically. She also eschewed books and wanted to learn about the animals on her own. Like, she didn't do any research on like the fish and the frogs and stuff, because she kept all her own journals and all that sort of stuff. And then one day they move out of that house, and she never goes. She like sorrowfully thinks about what probably happened to that pond, about how whoever probably brought the house turned it back into a pool and cleaned it and blah blah blah. It's all just kind of sad and interesting. So I mentioned earlier, but the Southern Reach, very none of this is really addressed in this movie, is very secretive. She realizes eventually that they didn't tell her a bunch of stuff. They basically intentionally taught them certain things and didn't tell them other important things, strategically keeping them in the dark. They also only referred to them by their titles. It's like strategically removing their names from them. And at this point in the book is where I got this vibe. And I still think it works pretty well. I'd be interested to see if anybody else got a similar reading of the book, to where I got to thinking that this whole thing was kind of an allegory, a metaphor for war and the military machine and what it does to people. So, or at least certain elements of it for sure. One, the hypnosis as an analogy for sort of the tearing down and rebuilding the military does to people, basically turning them into, killing machines, robot, like basically the way when you get into boot camp and stuff, they tear you down and build you back up in the exact way that they want you to be, not using names, again, turning them into sort of nameless cogs in this machine, keeping them in the dark about stuff and only giving them the information that they, quote, need to know. Eventually, when her husband does come back, the way he has changed and he's not himself. And this is a whole thing that it's similar to the movie when she's like, she kisses him and he like doesn't react, and he feels different. That's very explicitly a description from the book of how it seems like he's like existing in a fog or something like that. And to me, it feels very similar to analogous to like PTSD and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
for sure.
And then ultimately at the end, the way she decides to stay in Area X and how she won't be going home feels like the stories you hear about soldiers who, when they do come back, they don't know how to come back to normal. Like, it's the idea of rejoining sort of quote unquote normal life just seems completely foreign to them. And I thought a lot of the elements of it to me felt, again, sort of analogous to a lot of what people in the military go through potentially. I couldn't find anything confirming that. I didn't do a ton of research. Jeff Vandermeer does not have a military history or anything as far as I was aware, but that doesn't mean it's not what he was going for. But anyways, their meet cute. We get their meet cute in the book, which I thought was fun. She describes how they met on a bench in a park and they pretended to be detectives and made up stories about people walking through the park to each other, which felt like a very real thing. I don't know. I enjoyed it. At one point in Area X, she has an encounter with some dolphins, and one of them comes to the surface and swims by and looks at her, and she's looking at it and sees its eye, and she like notices that it has very human eyes and very familiar eyes. Later, she'll go on to realize that she thinks it may actually have been her husband, and that it wasn't just familiar because it was human, but that because it was her husband. Again, never confirmed or anything, but just kind of a thought she has. Then the lighthouse. So this is fine in the movie. I thought it's pretty cool, but there's so much more going on in the book here. When she gets to the lighthouse in the book, it's like fortified. There's like a wall built around it, including a wall built on the sea side, which she thinks is really weird because she's like, well, what would have been attacking from the sea? It doesn't make any sense. Like, she thinks this is very unsettling, that there's a wall against the sea, basically. There's a big hole in the main wall. There was clearly like a big gunfight at some point. She gets into it. There's like furniture and blood everywhere. Like it lots of stuff has gone down in this lighthouse over the years. At one point, she does find a photo of a lighthouse keeper and his family, and she ends up taking it. And this actually made me think of the film The Lighthouse, which I have not seen.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that also does like it's a very similar like weird horror, like Lovecraftian. And I was like, is that like part of this universe? Yeah. Yeah, I legitimately because he has in the picture that the lighthouse keeper has a hat and a big beard, and it's like exactly the imagery of Willem Dafoe's character from The Lighthouse. Anyways, I thought that was interesting. Eventually, she gets to the top of the lighthouse, and when she's there, she discovers a hidden room at the top underneath the floorboards. And the psychologist had been hanging out there, like she sees like her stuff there, like her backpack and stuff. And then she looks down in the room, and it's full of a mountain of old journals, like hundreds or thousands of them. And she realizes in this moment that they've been lied to, and that there haven't just been 12 expeditions. There's been hundreds of expeditions. And she jumps down and starts reading all of these old journals, finds like tons of different references to the writing on the wall in the tower, and also like reads about the attacks on the lighthouse, all the stuff that she found, like the evidence of the old attacks she found. And she just spends like hours digging through all this rotting pile of books that's full of rats and cockroaches and stuff. It's really creepy and weird, and I was really hoping to see that in the movie because it just would have been gnarly. She does actually too find her husband's journal, and she takes it for later. And then as she's leaving, she sees the legs of the psychologist down on the beach, and this is at the end of a chapter, and we don't know what happened, but we see her legs, and I'm like, oh, I guess she jumped and killed herself or whatever. But she's not dead. She goes down there, and in this scene in the movie is great. I love the psychologist's death scene in the movie. I think it works really well. It's very creepy in its own way, but it's definitely creepy in the book. She gets down there and she's still alive. And when she walks up to her, she's like injured. She jumped off the lighthouse and she's like, can't move. She's bleeding from lots of different places, broke like every bone in her body, but she's still alive. And as she walks up to the biologist, she starts screaming as the biologist walks up to the psychologist, she starts screaming Annihilation at her. The psychologist does. And we don't know what we're just like, what? Okay. And she screams Annihilation at her like 4 times. And then they just start having a conversation. And the psychologist sort of rambles about how the biologist is changing and she could see the flame in her as she was walking up because she could see her coming from far away when she was up in the lighthouse, and she has this flame in her, and the biologist keeps insisting that she isn't changing or whatever, and the psychologist is like mocking her, and she's like, oh, if you're not changing, let's just have a picnic. It's very interesting, very funny, and weird and morose. But finally, the psychologist does die. And again, I mentioned earlier, but like she grows like plants and stuff out of her and emits light and stuff. But the biologist searches through all of her stuff and finds a list of hypnotic commands, and she's going through it, and it's like the ones from earlier where it's like command of authority or whatever to like blah, blah, blah. And one of the last ones she finds says annihilation, help induce immediate suicide.
Oof.
So she was screaming annihilation at the biologist to get her to kill herself.
Ugh.
Just very creepy and weird. It's great. Again, all that kind of stuff. Don't know how it would work in the movie, but super creepy and fun in the book. A couple more things here. The moaning creature, mentioned this earlier, very creepy in the book. Never see it, but we see like the remnants in the face of the old psychologist that she finds. It's all gnarly and weird. She ends up in a foot race with this thing and outruns it, but it's like right behind her. It's all, it's very, it just makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up as you're reading it. And also after she gets away from it and she hears it behind her, and the way she describes it is she hears it begging for her to witness its existence, which is just, and she considers this, but then the scientist in her considers like going back to look at it because she's like, well, I want to see what it looks like, but like the more rational part of herself wins out, and she does not go back. So at this point, she didn't realize, and again, none of this is in the book or in the movie. She realizes that she is changing, and it's this thing that she calls the brightness that she feels inside of herself, and it's transforming her. It has heightened her senses, and that's actually what allows her to kill the surveyor when she comes back. The surveyor shoots her a couple times, but then she's able to sneak up on the surveyor and kill her. And she explains later that the whole reason she thinks she was able to do this is because her senses were super heightened. But she also realizes that being injured like stalls the transformation because she got shot by the surveyor a couple times, and she can tell that the transformation is like healing her. Like the brightness is healing her, and while it's healing her, it can't be transforming her, basically. It's all, again, it's so hard to explain in this. It's really just weird. Also, the scene where she does kill the surveyor is a really sad, chilling scene that has some really creepy imagery. Like she carries her body out into the water and like lets it, she doesn't want to bury her because she thinks that if she buries her, maybe she won't transform, and she wants her to be able to transform, but she also doesn't want to just leave her there because that feels wrong. So she like carries her out into the water and just like lets her body sink. And there's this description of her pale hand, like a sea anemone, like sinking below the surface. It's all gnarly and creepy. I would have liked to see that scene, but I didn't miss it a ton because we get a bunch of other cool stuff in the movie. She postulates at one point that the Southern Reach has been basically feeding people to Area X, hoping to not antagonize it, but also hoping that through luck or repetition, someone will come up with an explanation or a solution, and they can figure out what to do about Area X before it takes over the world, essentially. One of the other things, at one point, she's reading her husband's journal that she found in the lighthouse. And he has this passage about how he wishes that they had been there together so that he could understand her better, because he thinks that in that situation, they would have been able to understand each other. Because again, the whole falling out between them was this lack of communication, this weird tension between them because of their different personalities and stuff. And he again is sadly opining on the fact that if she had been there, maybe they could have truly understood each other. And I think what we're supposed to get here is that the weirdness, the overall weirdness of Area X sort of represents the imperviousness of other people's consciousness, and sort of simultaneously the trauma that shapes all of us, and how sharing that trauma can allow us to understand each other. They're interesting ideas. It's sad ideas. I'm not doing a good job explaining it. You kind of just have to read it. I have this in better in the book, but I think the movie actually coalesces some of these ideas in a way that feels more focused and digestible. The book just kind of spews it all at you like scattershot and lets you kind of just do what you want with it. The movie is much more focused, much more like a traditional, again, thematic arc. I think they're interesting in different ways. The book leaves you more unsettled, and the movie leaves you more, I don't know. It's a more transformative experience, whereas the book is a more like unsettling experience, if that makes sense. It's hard to explain. If you've read and watched it, you might understand what I'm saying. If you have only done one, it's pretty hard to understand what I'm saying. So I mentioned earlier the her seeing the dolphin's eye, and she wonders if it had been familiar for a reason other than appearing human. And I just wanted to mention this line because I think it's a great line. Soon enough, I banished this nonsense. Some questions will ruin you if you are denied the answer long enough. Which I thought it's a great line. And then finally, the encounter with the crawler. I have this in better in the book, but it's a combination of the movie nailed it and better in the book. The movie nailed some aspects of it, but changed so much that it's kind of just entirely different. And I want to read some of this from the book. So my inkling is that the thing after the psychologist in the film shoots the light out and we get that weird thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of supposed to be the crawler, basically. It's in the movie's equivalent of the tower, and it's a similar type of description, or what we see in the film is similar to the description we get in the movie. I want to read the description because I want to express how weird this book is. And this is these couple sections I'm going to read here are some of the better sort of moments to get that across. As soon as I turned that corner entire, it was no longer golden, but blue-green, and the blue-green light was like nothing I had experienced before. It surged out, blinding and bleeding, and thick and layered and absorbing. It so overwhelmed my ability to comprehend shapes within it that I forced myself to switch from sight, to focus at first on reports from other senses. The sound that came to me now was like a crescendo of ice or ice crystals shattering to form an unearthly noise that I had mistaken earlier for buzzing, and which began to take on an intense melody and rhythm that filled my brain. Vaguely, from some far-off place, I realized that the words on the wall were being infused with the sound as well, but that I had not the capacity to hear it before. The vibration had a texture and a weight, and with it came a burning smell, as of late fall leaves or like some vast and distant engine close to overheating. The taste on my tongue was like brine set ablaze. No words can, no photographs could. As I adjusted to the light, the crawler kept changing at a lightning pace, as if to mock my ability to comprehend it. It was a figure within a series of refracted panes of glass. It was a series of layers in the shape of an archway. It was a great slug-like monster ringed by satellites of even odder creatures. It was a glistening star. My eyes kept glancing off it as if an optic nerve was not enough. Then it became an overwhelming hugeness in my battered vision, seeming to rise and keep rising as it leapt towards me. The shape spread until it was even where it was not, or should not have been. It seemed now more like a kind of obstacle or wall or thick closed door blocking the stairs. Not a wall of light, gold, blue, green, existing in some other spectrum, but a wall of flesh that resembled light, with sharp curving elements within it and textures like ice when it was frozen from flowing water. An impression of living things lazily floating in the air around it like soft tadpoles, but at the limits of my vision, so I could not tell if this was akin to those floating dark motes that are tricks of the eyes that do not exist. Within this fractured mass, within all of these different impressions of the crawler, half blinded but still triangulating through my other senses, I thought I saw a darker shadow of an arm or a kind of echo of an arm in constant blurring motion, continuously imparting to the left-hand wall a repetition of depth and signal that made its progress laboriously slow. Its message, its code of change, of recalibrations and adjustments, of transformations, and perhaps another dark shadow, vaguely head-shaped above the arm, but as indistinct as if I had been swimming in murky water and seen in the distance a shape obscured by thick seaweed. So yeah, in particular, the part at the beginning, it was a figure within a series of refracted panes of glass. It was a series of layers in the shape of an archway. It was a great slug-like monster. That gives me, like, the thing we get in the movie is like this almost like fractal, like black holy, like,
yeah,
it just constantly changing, constantly morphing weird thing. I thought the movie kind of nailed about as good as could be expected, depicting whatever that is. Yeah, and I also absolutely love the music and sound design in the scene in the film. I thought it was just brilliant. Ultimately, she is able to rip herself away from it, from looking at it momentarily by remembering that it is just an organism and not some other thing. but ultimately she tries to pass it and is pinned by the crawler, and it probes like into her brain, and she experiences the worst agony she's ever felt. And the description of this I just have to read because it is something else. And this kind of reminded me of the part where it pins her against the door a little bit. The thing, whatever the copy of her does, a little bit. It's very different. It was the most agony I had ever been in, as if a metal rod had been repeatedly thrust into me, and then the pain distributed like a second skin inside the contours of my outline. Everything became tinged with the red. I blacked out, I came to, I blacked out, I came to, I blacked out, still perpetually gasping for breath, knees buckling, scrabbling at the walls for support. My mouth opened so wide from the shrieking that something popped in my jaw. I think I stopped breathing for a minute, but the brightness inside experienced no such interruption. It just kept oxygenating my blood. Yeah. And then it lets her go, but it's just gnarly stuff, like super gnarly. Anyways, I wanted to share some of that because, again, it's hard to express what it's like reading. And the whole book is written like that. Like, just, it's very well written and wild. Whew. All right, time to talk about some stuff that I thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
So in the film, they're both in the military. In the book, it's just the husband that has a military background. I think this change works for the movie's version of their relationship and for the movie version of Lena, where she's like a more badass kind of girl or whatever. I do love the scene in the film when he comes home. I love him just walking into the house as she's painting, and he walks through the background. It's almost like a horror film, like a Jason, like what, you know what I mean? I love that so much. And it is kind of similar to the book of how he just shows up and is like in their kitchen, like eating, and she's like, "What are you doing?" It's kind of similar, but I thought the movie's version was just a little creepier and weirder. And he also, like I mentioned earlier, seems wrong in a very similar way. In the book, they have sex, and she can tell while they're having sex that like something is not right. Like he's very weird, and it's kind of similar to when she kisses him in the movie and he like doesn't react. I love the shot in the beginning of after he gets back and he has the glass of water on the table and they're kind of holding hands and we see it refracted through the glass on the table. Beautiful shot, but then also, and she pulls her hands apart at the end after she realizes something is wrong. And then at the end, that shot is kind of echoed where she's sitting in the interrogation room basically, and she's holding the glass of water is sitting on the table next to her, and we see her hands refracted in it by themselves. Super cool stuff. For this movie story, I think the narrative structure of the film makes sense by introducing us to Area X along with Lena, the biologist.
Yeah.
I don't know if the book structure and format would work for general audiences because it's real weird. In the book, we just jump right in, and then we sort of get piecemealed out Area X information throughout the course of the book. And I think that with everything else going on in the film, that might just be too much for sort of general audiences to deal with. I enjoyed it. I love how little we know throughout the course of the book and how it's doled out to us. But I think general audiences would have been more annoyed than I think they already were with this movie, because a lot of reviews, like on IMDb, of this movie are not positive. It's got like a 6.8 or something like that, because a lot of people who saw it were like, "What is this?" They just weren't prepared for what it was. And it's so funny because the book is even weird. Like the movie, as weird as it is at the end, is a fairly straightforward version of the story that we get in the book. And so yeah, I can't imagine that people would have been into the version of the story we get in the book. But I don't know, maybe not, who knows. I like the little tease early in the movie where after her husband is in the Area X hospital or whatever, and she walks into him and says to him, "I know why you went in, but we don't know why yet." I thought that was a fun tease, teasing this greater reason for why he went on this seeming suicide mission, ultimately finding out the whole affair thing. I thought that was fun. Nothing like that really happens in the book. I mentioned it earlier, but I love the discussion about how they're all like damaged goods and about kind of the backstory of all the different people and the trauma they've been through, how one of them lost their daughter to cancer and then their spouse left them and all this sort of stuff. I think it adds a lot thematically to the discussion of trauma and how people deal with it that the movie is having. Which again, we don't get any of the backstories of any of the characters apart from the biologist in the book. I absolutely love Ventress's performance in the film. Jennifer Jason Leigh, or Lee, one of the two. Her performance is incredible. The conversation they have at night when she walks out there, and they're like in that little like lookout hut or whatever. I thought was the self-destruction conversation is so good, so well written. None of that's from the book. And she's discussing all the ways that people self-destruct. And she says, you know, we do this, we drink, we smoke, we ruin a happy marriage. And the look on Natalie Portman's face when she says that, I love the subtlety. It's so good. Definitely could see where the film was going there, and I was into it. There's a line in the film that is not, again, anything from the book that I thought was a really good line, which is, I think it's Josie explaining what the shimmer is, and she says the shimmer is a prism that refracts everything: plant DNA, animal DNA, radio waves, everything. And they're like, even us. And I think that's the kind of vibe that you get from the book, and I think this kind of is a good way to help explain what's going on to audiences a little more than the book ever does. Again, the book never really gets that quite. It has moments that it kind of explains stuff like that, but that was a pretty well written line to explain kind of what's going on in Area X. I like keeping all of the team alive longer in the film. Everybody dies so quickly, relatively quickly in the book. It's not that long of a book, but like the whole last like half of it, they're basically everybody's dead already for most of the stuff she does. And I think it makes sense in the movie to keep them alive so that we have other characters to talk to and bounce stuff off of and interact with, as opposed to just getting her inner monologue. This is a journal, so it works.
Right.
But in a movie, I don't think it would work as well. I love the line when she's talking to Benedict Wong in the sort of after she comes back thing. And he's like, you know, everybody else died, but you came back. And she says, I had to come back. I'm not sure any of them did. Great line. Enjoy it a lot. Again, very different motivations from the book's version of the biologist, but it works for the movie. And I thought it was a good line. I like how after Josie walks away and becomes a plant, from there to the lighthouse, we just sort of watch Lena almost like teleport. Like she's just like in one location on the road, and she starts crying, and then like all suddenly she's on the beach. And again, very dreamlike. It kind of reminds me of, you know, how in like Inception they talk about like you don't remember how you got to the place you were. Yeah. I love how it's disorienting, and it feels like a similar kind of thing to like reading the book at times. I liked that a lot. I thought the whole scene where Oscar Isaac records himself in the lighthouse and blows himself up was super creepy and worked really well. That reveal of the doppelgangers, nothing like that is in the book. Again, it's a little more like Hollywood, kind of on the nose, but I thought it worked and was creepy. In particular, I loved, less than the actual video, the moment when she walks in and sees the body with the ash on the wall, and you just know, like I just knew what it was in that instant. And then having it confirmed in the video, I thought was super cool. Love that scene. When she goes down into the hole, there's this great moment. It's pretty subtle, but we get in the foreground, we see Ventress like talking to the wall or whatever and like kind of spouting nonsense, but you can tell they've done either a makeup effect or CG, and her face is like blank. Yeah. It's like this creepy, like faceless mask thing. I hated it, but I loved it. Super spooky. Big fan of that. And then she turns around and she just looks like her again, but that was super cool. And then I talked about it earlier, but I love this movie's ending. It works so well. It's so creepy. And the book's ending, while having some good moments, kind of felt aimless to me. Again, I think that's intentional, but and I have these next notes in Better in the Movie because this is what happens in the end of the book. And I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. So she gets, as I mentioned earlier, she gets released by the crawler after it probes her, and she continues going down. And once she gets down far enough, she sees this white door in the distance and sort of forces herself towards this door. But then she stops and decides not to go through that door, and then turns around and forces herself to go back up. And she goes past the crawler, and this time it ignores her because it's already probed her, I guess, or whatever. And then as she walks past, she turns around and looks at it. And at this point, she sees the lighthouse keeper in the crawler from the picture. It's creepy. It's gnarly. I don't know how the movie would have explained any of this because she just sort of speculates. But it does kind of make sense, even with the movie's version, if the meteor hit the lighthouse and the first thing it like absorbed and took over was the lighthouse keeper, and now it is like this first organism that it whatever. I guess it's again whatever. She sees it's creepy and weird, but it just I was like, what is even going on here? And then she's recollecting on the fact that in the journal or before her husband left, he asked her if she'll come to Area X to come after him if he doesn't come back. And she realizes in the moment now, thinking about that conversation she had with him, that she wishes she had come to Area X for him. And I think the implication there is that she actually did. So throughout the book, it's kind of implied that she came to Area X to like figure out what happened to her husband and like what was going on and experience what he experienced. But then at the end and over the course of like when we find out about her, it's kind of shifts to implying that she kind of came here for her own selfish reasons, and it actually didn't really have anything to do with her husband. And that was just kind of a lie she was telling herself, and that it's really more to do with like her own selfish like pursuit of knowledge kind of. It's hard to explain, and this is the part of the book that I felt like I understood the least. I'll just say that. I would be interested. I have not read any like sort of assessments of this book or what people think it means and stuff like that. But this part didn't work as well for me. Again, why I have this in better in the movie, because it's just the movie's version just worked a lot better for me. She does have a theory about what is going on, and I want to read this because I thought it was really interesting. This is my last note here before we get in the last couple notes here. So she comes to the realization or thought that basically that the tower makes and remakes the world within the borders of Area X, and that it's slowly sending out emissaries across the border. I'll just read it here. It slowly sends its emissaries across the border in even greater numbers, so that in tangled gardens and fallow fields, its envoys begin their work. How does it travel and how far? What strange matter mixes and mingles? In some future moment, perhaps this infiltration will reach even a certain remote sheet of coastal rock, quietly germinate in those tidal pools I know so well. She studied tidal pools in college. Unless, of course, I am wrong that Area X is rousing itself from slumber, changing, becoming different than it was before. The terrible thing, the thought I cannot dislodge after all I have seen, is that I can no longer say with conviction that this is a bad thing. Not when looking at the pristine nature of Area X and then the world beyond, which we have altered so much. Before she died, the psychologist said I had changed, and I think she meant I had changed sides. It isn't true. I don't even know if there are sides or what that might mean, but it could be true. I see now that I could be persuaded. A religious or superstitious person, someone who believed in angels or in demons, might see it differently. Almost anyone else might see it differently, but I am not those people. I am just the biologist. I don't require any of this to have a deeper meaning. I am aware that all of this speculation is incomplete, inexact, inaccurate, and useless. If I don't have real answers, it is because we still don't know what questions to ask. Our instruments are useless, our methodology broken, our motivations selfish. And so, again, this is the ending where I'm just like, I don't know necessarily what I'm supposed to be getting out of this. And I also think the book is telling me that I'm not supposed to know what I'm supposed to be getting. Like, very clear, almost explicitly in that last couple paragraphs there.
Yeah.
It's saying, like,
your attempt to figure this out is futile.
Yes. And that I find a little frustrating, even though I'm aware that's the point, is my thing. And then again, the I am not returning home. I do like she does return in the movie and apparently in future books. All right, I have a handful of things to talk about in the movie Nailed It.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
We've already talked about most of the things that the movie nailed because it nailed, again, the weird ephemeral beauty of Area X, the vibes, it nailed that. Everything else, it basically invented whole cloth. But there are a couple other things, and I mentioned this earlier, but giving us the flashbacks and backstory of her relationship throughout her time in Area X, going from current time in Area X to their relationship previously. That is how the book doles that out, and the movie does the same thing, slowly revealing things. I like that came from the book.
Yeah, the non-linear structure that the movie employs kind of gave me Arrival vibes.
Yes.
Where you're not super sure at what point in the timeline things actually occurred.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And the book is less of the like out of order and more of the just bouncing back and forth.
Yeah.
But it's a similar vibe. And then my last note for the movie Nailed It, again, only a couple things. And this isn't even, I say it's the movie Nailed It, but it's the movie nailing the vibe. There's a line in the movie where right before the psychologist bursts into energy or whatever, she says, "I don't know what it wants or if it wants." And then she like screams annihilation and bursts into flames. That line is not in the book, but it expresses the whole mystery of Area X pretty succinctly in a way that felt good. And it's the kind of like philosophical musings we get from the biologist constantly in the book. So it's the movie nailed the vibes. All right, got a few odds and ends before we get to the final verdict.
Okay, so I don't remember. I think this line was like right after they fought the crocodile, maybe.
It is. It's when they're looking at
yeah,
like, the
they're
teeth
looking
or whatever.
at the teeth and they're like, oh, it looks like shark teeth. And I guess Natalie Portman's character is like, we can't crossbreed between different species. And I was like, can't we?
Yeah, we kind of can.
Because we made ligers.
Yeah.
Like
also donkey or mules or one of those is like a
mule.
Yeah, mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. I'm fairly or something like that. One of those combinations. Yeah. One of them is a cross between a horse and something.
Don't we do that with plants all the time?
Well, definitely plants. They might not be different species. I think they are though. Yeah. So that line felt very incorrect to me. There is some truth in the sense that when you crossbreed like ligers and mules and all those and any of those crossbreeding we've done, they are sterile as far as I know. Like they cannot reproduce. The offspring that are, I think are, it's complicated, and I'm sure somebody who is a biologist and knows more about this might have a more explicit explanation here. But I do think that was a very broad sentence that wasn't really true.
Yeah.
Like
I didn't even think of it while we were watching it, but I just thought like with the plants, like a bunch of citrus fruits that we have are like crosses between, and maybe that's different because they're all citrus. I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
But I don't know that one. She said that, and I was a little bit like, okay.
Yeah. It also rung incorrect to me. And I was like, maybe I just don't know enough, and I didn't have enough time to research it, but yeah.
So if you are a biologist, let us know. The other thing that this movie gave me some of the same frustrations that horror movies often do.
Yeah.
Because I was like, why do you people keep choosing the absolute creepiest places to set up camp? Just the worst.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, this abandoned military base.
Where we found bodies and videotapes of people being murdered here.
How about this abandoned town that's full of plants in the shape of people?
Yeah.
Perfect. Let's all go to sleep.
Amazing. Yeah. No, for sure. Again, I think the unspoken explanation for that is the Area X messes with people's rational cognitive abilities. But yeah, it is particularly funny. There's a line in the book that made me crack up when I was reading it, and I was trying to figure out who each of the actresses played. In the, like while I was reading the book, I was trying to like figure out. Obviously, I knew Natalie Portman was the biologist, but other than that, I wasn't sure. And I think I knew Jennifer Jason Leigh was like the psychologist, like the leader of the group. But I was like, I wonder who Tessa Thompson plays. And there's a role from The Surveyor where at one point, the biologist like does, I don't remember what she does, but she does something. She touches her in some way, like in a friendly manner. And the Surveyor responds by saying, "Don't touch me again." Like she kind of like laughs, but then goes, "Don't touch me again or I'll hurt you." And I was like, Tessa Thompson feels right for this role. But then the roles are completely different. Like the Surveyor isn't really a character. If anything, she's Gina Rodriguez's role, like character. And two, Tessa Thompson does not play the role I normally see. I feel like I've normally seen Tessa Thompson play and stuff in this movie. She's a much more like, she's a very different character. I was for sure thought she was gonna be the Surveyor, who's like a gruff, like
kind of aggressive.
Yeah. Like kind of, yeah. But that's Gina Rodriguez's character, kind of.
Yeah, but she definitely plays like a more softer spoken, like introspective,
like
kind of character.
Brainy, smart, like the smart person. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting because I wasn't expecting that from Tessa Thompson. To be fair, I haven't seen her in a ton of stuff, but.
My last note here, and I forget at what point I wrote this down, but it doesn't even really matter. And I think the most unrealistic thing about this whole movie, I could buy it all whole cloth, except that they aren't constantly going, what the fuck? What the fuck?
No.
Because that's what I would have been doing.
Dude, and to be fair, Gina Rodriguez at least kind of does. In that scene where they find the dude's body like smeared across the wall in flowers in the in the pool, I would be like, fuck this. This is nope. I mean, even the video.
Yeah.
But
I mean that would have been an absolute no for me. I'm turning around. Goodbye.
Yeah. Wild. It's nuts. And they kind of do, at least, again, a couple of them kind of do, but it's, gnarly. All right. We wanted to remind you that you could do us a giant favor by heading over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Supporting us there for just a couple bucks a month. If you support us for $5 or more a month, you get access to bonus content, which we put out every month. We watch something and talk about it that's not book related, or I mean, I guess it can be, but usually not book related. Just something we want to talk about, a movie or whatever. We like
to watch movies that we don't get to talk about
right
here
on the main. Yeah. This month we are talking about Midsommar.
Mm-hmm.
I say this month, July.
Yes.
Because we already did June's. June's came out at the beginning of June-ish, and that was The Mummy. So if you want to hear us talk about 1999,
we were actually on top of the bonus episode.
Yeah, it feels weird. I was like, it's the end of the month. Wait, we haven't. Oh no, we already did. We were ahead of schedule. We almost never do that. We talked about The Mummy in June, but yeah, if you want to see us talk about Midsommar, a couple weeks or something like that, we'll be watching and talking about that. You support us for $5, you can hear it. Also, if you want to follow us on social media, just head to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, all those places. Search for This Film Is Lit, and you will find us and follow us and interact. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what you thought about Annihilation. We put out a poll and we get some votes, but more importantly, we get your comments. What did you think about the book? What did you think about the movie? What did you think about our discussion? What were your thoughts? Let us know. We will read them and discuss them in the next prequel episode. I think that's everything. It's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
At this point, I feel like people could probably see this coming, but this one is absolutely a tie. I loved both of these stories, and I loved them in different ways. I think this is one of the more fascinating adaptations that we've done because the movie captures so much of the spirit, the vibe, and the energy of the book while completely changing the narrative and tweaking the themes. The book is a masterclass in creating tension and suspense through the unknown and the unknowable. I constantly wanted to know more, to understand what was truly going on, but Vandermeer simply refused to give in to my demands. He paints chaotic, otherworldly scenes with some of the most evocative prose I've read in quite some time. I would finish a passage and be unsure of what exactly I just read, but also be sure that I was feeling exactly the way that Vandermeer wanted me to. I would try my best to wrap my brain around something so totally alien that it defies description and comprehension, and I would fail, in the same way that the biologist failed. But that failure was the point, and I never once felt that the story was weaker for it. The book contains passages that evoke existential dread and that stick with you in a way that is hard to describe. I challenge anyone to read this book and not have it haunt the dark recesses of your mind for the foreseeable future. Vandermeer presents you with ideas that will challenge you and just lets them linger, giving you no answers, offering you no respite. The movie takes a different path for the majority of its runtime, instead telling a more traditional story. It sets up characters you care about and relationships that felt easier to digest and connect to, even if they were a bit more expected, bordering on cliche. But when we hit the final act, the film takes off. It spends an hour and a half laying the groundwork, and then it sticks the landing. The last 30 minutes of this film are just as weird, just as unsettling, and just as mind-blowing as some of the best moments from the book, and the visuals throughout are truly breathtaking. I had chills during the entire final 20 minutes of this film. So here is where I ultimately land. The book is weirder, it's deeper, and its refusal to give you answers makes it a truly fascinating read, but I was also left feeling a bit empty by the end. I craved a more solidified thematic throughline. At times it felt a bit like reading someone's dream journal, which, while weirdly engaging to read, doesn't leave you feeling like you consumed a fully formed story. The film, as I said, is more traditional, at times more cliche, but it has a point. It has a clear message about guilt, grief, trauma, and regret, and it's trying to deliver that, and it does so masterfully. And yet it still leaves things vague enough and weird enough to allow for different interpretations. So it's a tie. Read the book, watch the movie, and enjoy both for what they are, which is really fucking good. What's next, Katie?
Up next, we will be talking about Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy.
Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy.
A novel by John Le Carre? I haven't looked up anything about him yet. And it's 2011 film adaptation.
I've not seen this movie.
I have not
It
either.
won a bunch of Oscars, I think. It's got what's Sirius Black's name? That actor.
I don't know.
Oh no. Gary Oldman. Gary Oldman is like, I believe, the main character in it. I think it's supposed to be good, but it's
it's like a spy thriller.
A spy thriller.
I don't know anything about it, so
I also don't. Yeah, he's the main character. It's got a bunch of people in it. Colin Firth, Tom Hardy, others. Mark Strong, John Hurt, one of his last roles probably. Anyways, I don't know anything about it, but yeah, I believe it. Let's see. It didn't win a bunch of Oscars. It was nominated for 3 Oscars, didn't win it. Anyways, supposed to be good. I'm interested to see what it's all about.
come back for our prequel episode if you want to know about the Oscars that Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy did not win.
Absolutely. We'll break down all of its losing contributions to the Oscars. And until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.